Suddenly, a small cat dressed like a traveler popped up. He was Theo, a wandering merchant, and he asked a group of adventurers if they wanted to see some amazing items. The adventurers were immediately charmed by how cute he was. They asked what he was selling, and Theo proudly held up a single cherry tomato. The adventurer just stared at it, completely confused. A cherry tomato, that was it. The whole group was let down. The mage complained that they were hoping for a legendary weapon or a rare potion, not something they could find anywhere. But Theo just smirked. He told the foolish humans they had it all wrong. This wasn't just any cherry tomato. His confidence caught them off guard. They realized he was talking about it like it was a real item, not just food. Status window popped up for the magical cherry tomato. It explained that eating it would slightly increase your magic power for 10 minutes. The adventurer thought the boost seemed pretty small. But then everyone saw the second effect. It could make you lose 10 grams of fat just by eating it. The adventurers couldn't believe it was real. Suddenly, this little tomato was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. The moment that second effect was revealed, the adventurers went absolutely nuts. Suddenly, everyone was shouting, trying to buy every single tomato Theo had. They were practically mobbing the pork. One of the adventurers grabbed Theo, his eyes wide with disbelief. He demanded to know where these things came from, who in the world could make an item like this. But Theo just let out a little laugh, completely unfazed. He clutched his bag, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He told them it was a secret. And that secret was a hidden farm, tucked away somewhere deep inside the tower, filled with rows of perfect tomato plants. This is where it all started, with someone carefully picking a single, ripe tomato right off the vine. That person was Park Sejun. After a long day of work, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked down at a basket full of tomatoes, held up by one of his little rabbit helpers. He figured that was probably enough for the day. So he turned and called out to the rest of his crew, telling them all it was time for a well-deserved break. Sejun grabbed a cup and started squeezing the tomatoes he just picked, making a fresh juice. A tiny bee-like creature landed on his shoulder, buzzing happily. It asked for some honey to add to the mix. The little bee happily obliged, dropping a single perfect drop of golden honey into the cup. He put the lid on and gave it a good shake, mixing everything together. He opened the top, and inside was a perfectly mixed, bright red drink. With his drink ready, he took a long sip. The rabbits gathered around, all enjoying their break together. He tilted his head back and chugged it down. Hilariously, all the rabbits copied him, tilting their heads back too. Turns out he'd created a brand new item, a vitality drink made from honey and cherry tomato juice. He held up the cup, feeling amazing, and the little rabbits cheered around his feet. This, he thought, was the... Just then, a new quest popped up from the system. It wanted him to give his honey water to the tower managers. The weird part, the compensation was nothing, and if he refused, the penalty was just disappointment. Sejun tried to brush it off, telling the system he'd make it for them later. But the window just flashed the word disappointment right back at him. Before he could argue any further, a familiar voice called out his name. Sejun looked up and saw a small figure bounding towards him over the rocks. It was Theo, the wandering merchant cat, announcing he was back. Sejun was surprised, telling his little employee he'd returned pretty quickly. The little cat leaped right into Sejun's arms, and the rabbits all gathered around, excited to see him. Theo proudly announced that he'd sold out of everything and brought back a huge bag of tower coins. Sejun was so impressed he joked about making him CEO for an hour. Sejun started laughing, saying it was only a matter of time before Theo's name was known everywhere. The poor cat just started sweating nervously. But Theo was all business. He said this was no time to fool around, he had to eat and leave again to earn more money. He then called over to a black rabbit, telling it to refill his supplies for the next trip. Sejun just sat back and watched his crew work. The black rabbit was catching fish with blinding speed. It was pretty obvious Theo had gotten addicted to making money. Then something popped into his head he'd almost forgotten. He walked over to a huge wall covered in tally marks. It had officially been 150 days since he got stuck here. He smiled. His name was Park Sejun and his class was Tower Farmer. Just then, the black rabbit hopped onto his shoulder, asking if he was done with his little break. A moment later, Theo climbed up his other shoulder, saying he'd help out too. This whole thing started 150 days ago, when he somehow got lost inside this massive tower. He looked out at the fields he'd built, his two little partners on his shoulders. With everything in order, he wondered what to do next. He decided it was time to tell his story. A story about how he managed to survive after getting lost inside the tower. And so his story began. It all started on a normal day, when a massive 99-floor black tower just appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a city. Turns out it wasn't just one. 100 of these towers appeared at the exact same time in major cities all across the globe. Every country tried to figure out what they were. All they learned was that the towers were almost a kilometer high and made of something that couldn't be broken. They even tried hitting one with a nuke, and it did absolutely nothing. Then one day the impossible happened. People started walking right out of the tower's solid walls. They were immediately swarmed by the press. The whole world wanted answers. Reporters were screaming questions, but everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did they get inside? One of the survivors explained his personal story. He said one day he was just suddenly sucked into a black hole. The next thing he knew, he had woken up on the tower's first floor. This revelation sent shockwaves across the globe. The news was everywhere. He explained that all 100 towers were connected. Once inside, a person would be awakened and had to choose a role, like a magician or a warrior. The real challenges and the monsters started appearing on the second floor. It was a full-blown press conference, with officials ready to give more details to the public. The speaker explained that every time a floor was cleared, the awakened would receive different kinds of rewards. He held up a golden ticket, saying it was a common reward. A reporter in the crowd immediately raised her hand, asking what the ticket was for. He explained that the awakened could enter and leave the tower freely. However, for an ordinary person to get inside, they needed one of these tickets. But even with a ticket, only the awakened could actually climb higher. The reporter pressed further, asking why anyone would risk going into such a dangerous place. She also wanted to know if anyone knew why the towers were generated in the first place. The speaker admitted that for now, nobody had that answer. He paused his explanation as a woman walked up and handed him a small, closed box. She opened the box, and a mountain of gold coins and jewels poured out onto the stage. The entire press room fell silent. Every single reporter was just staring, completely stunned by the sheer amount of wealth in front of them. With everyone's attention locked on the treasure, the speaker made his point crystal clear. He told them that if they wanted money, all they had to do was go up the tower. And just like that, the world went crazy. News broke that the price for tower ticket was about to jump to 200 million won. Hundreds of people were already lining up to buy one before the price went up. The scene shifts to a grocery store, where an older woman at the counter was talking to a young man. She complained about how crazy the world was getting. She couldn't believe they were asking people to risk their lives and then charging them a fortune for the ticket. The young man just smiled warmly and agreed with her. This was Park Sejun, just a regular 26-year-old guy. He pulled out his phone and checked his own finances. After deducting tuition fees, rent, and interest, there wasn't much left at all. He sighed walking up the stairs. With the ticket price going up again, he wondered how he'd ever be able to afford it. He stopped and just stared at the tower. It stretched all the way into the sky, a constant reminder of the life he couldn't reach. The whole thing was just exhausting. But then something clicked, an idea popped into his head. He shook off the doubt and told himself not to give up. There had to be a way to earn more money. He looked down at the vegetables in his bag. He'd bought them for cheap, but he knew their price was rising. That's when he decided he'd try planting them himself. He remembered seeing a commercial for a home vegetable grower. It featured his favorite idol, Sarah. This was it. He was going to save up every penny he could to buy that ticket. Maybe his talent for growing things would even get him into a good guild once he got inside. He imagined a future where he'd already cleared the tower. He'd be successful enough to finally meet Sarah, not as a fan but as a partner. The thought alone was enough to make him smile. Full of new energy, he pumped his fist, ready to work hard. That's when a black hole started swirling on the ground right in front of him. Before he could even react, the vortex started pulling him. He stared in disbelief, trying to understand what was happening. Then it hit him, this wasn't just some random portal. This was the vanishing, the same phenomenon that sucked in the very first awakened. His fear vanished, replaced by a wild thought. This was it. This was his ticket into the tower. He was ready to risk his life for this. With a huge grin, he opened his arms and let the black hole take him. Sejun stood there ready for his big moment, but instead of pulling him in, the black hole just sat there. Then it started to shrink. He panicked, yelling at the portal to take him with it. He wasn't about to let this chance vanish. If it wouldn't take him, he'd force his way in. He broke into a sprint and dove headfirst towards the shrinking energy. His hand reached out, plunging into the darkness. The landing was not graceful. He slammed face first into the ground. He groaned, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Pushing himself up, he looked around, wondering if his crazy plan actually worked. Did he make it into the tower? His eyes went wide. The fancy chandeliers, the marble floors. This was it. He was in the first floor plaza, the legendary starting point filled with equipment and potions. He'd actually made it. But this wasn't the plaza. There were no chandeliers, no marble floors. He was in some kind of dark cave. Light was pouring in from an opening high above. He stood there completely alone in the middle of this huge empty space. His confusion turned to shock. This wasn't just a wrong turn. This was somewhere else entirely. He grabbed his head, panic setting in. None of this made any sense. He realized he wasn't even in a cave. He was standing at the bottom of a massive stone-lined pit surrounded by a forest. When he looked up, the world itself seemed broken. The sky was below and the ground was above, and in the distance, he saw it. The tower, it was real, but he wasn't on the first floor. He was stranded somewhere completely unknown with no idea how to get back. Far away in a dark room, a crystal ball suddenly started to glow. A clawed hand reached out. The orb was sending a clear message. Something had changed inside the tower. A massive black dragon stared into the light, its eyes glowing with power. It was the manager of the tower, and it was her job to find the cause of this disturbance. And the cause of all that commotion was our boy Sejun, who was still in the middle of a complete meltdown. He remembered hearing all the stories about the first floor. People described it as a shiny palace, with tons of shops where you could buy potions and all sorts of items. He even remembered some famous warrior on TV explaining how crucial the training ground was. It was the only way to get strong enough to fight the monsters and survive. But his reality was nothing like that. There was just a dark cave and cold water. The only way out was a hole high up in the ceiling, completely out of reach. So he just sat there completely defeated. He'd already roamed the cave for a whole day, but there was no exit, no training ground, no store, nothing. He'd screamed for help until his throat was raw, but nobody answered. The horrible truth was finally sinking in. He was lost. He was completely, utterly alone. And then he just started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind you let out when you realize how completely screwed you are. Suddenly, a sharp beeping sound cut through the silence, snapping him out of it. It was his phone. The alarm was going off, which meant he'd been stuck in this cave for a full day. There was no signal, but the clock was still working. And with that thought, another one hit him. His stomach growled loudly. He was starving. He emptied his bag to take stock of what he had left. Wasn't much. A bottle of water, some cherry tomatoes, green onions, a few sweet potatoes. and one single apple. He picked up the apple. In this dark, lonely place, it felt like a treasure. He took a bite and for a second, everything felt a little better. The apple was sweet, and it was probably the best thing he'd ever eaten. He finished the apple in just a few bites. It was good, but it wasn't nearly enough to fill him up. Still starving, he grabbed one of the sweet potatoes and took a big bite. He started chewing, not really sure what to expect. Turns out it was amazing. Crunchy sweet, way better than he ever thought a raw sweet potato could be. He just kept eating, completely lost in the moment. After finishing the potato, he let out a happy little laugh and washed it all down with some water. With his stomach finally full, he just collapsed onto a nearby rock, completely satisfied. For the first time since he got here, he felt a little bit of peace. That was a good meal. But that feeling of peace didn't last long. He just laid there staring up at the only patch of sky he could see, wondering how long he was going to be stuck. He knew he had to find a way out, and soon. His food wasn't going to last forever. He looked over at his small stash of groceries, a few cherry tomatoes, some green onions. It wasn't much. The thought was terrifying. If no one found him, he'd just waste away down here. But then something inside him snapped. He shot up, refusing to accept that fate. Getting into the tower was his dream, and he wasn't going to let it end like this. That's when he saw the apple core he'd tossed aside earlier, and suddenly he had an idea. He didn't hesitate. He crawled over to a patch of dirt and started digging a small hole with his bare hands. He carefully placed the apple core inside. If he couldn't find a way out, he would just have to make his own food source right here. He moved on to the green onions. His plan was simple: eat the leaves and plant the roots to grow more. He planted the onion roots in neat rows, then added a few tomatoes and sweet potatoes. The rest of his food he'd have to ration carefully. He was filled with a new sense of purpose. He was going to survive no matter what it took. He looked down at his tiny farm. It wasn't much, but it was his future. Everything depended on those little plants. But then a loud noise from the darkness made him jump. His heart started pounding. He was sure it was a monster, but that didn't make any sense. He'd been told there were no monsters on the first floor. He stared into the darkness, his mind racing. Was he completely wrong about where he was? That's when he looked up and saw it. The sky was dominated by a strange blue light with a dark circle eclipsing the center. He recognized it instantly: a blue moon. The moment the blue moon appeared, a sharp pain shot through Sejun's head. It was so bad he dropped to the ground, feeling like his whole body was being crushed. But through the pain, he saw something moving in the sky. Flying right in front of the moon was a massive winged creature. His eyes went wide. He couldn't believe it. It was a black dragon. Somehow, even in this crazy situation, all he could think about was how beautiful it was. The feeling was so overwhelming that he just passed out. But as he lay there, something strange started to happen. Under the light of the blue moon, the green onions he'd planted began to glow. He finally started to stir, his phone's alarm going off right next to him. He fumbled for a second before finally grabbing it. His head was pounding. He had no idea how long he'd been out. He checked the date on his phone and his eyes went wide. He'd been unconscious for 2 whole days. When he tried to get up, a sharp pain shot through his back. His whole body ached. The poor guy didn't have any energy left at all. That's when he noticed something strange behind him. At first, he thought it was some kind of tree. But it wasn't a tree. It was one of his green onions, and it had grown to an insane size. He just stared, completely stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. These weren't just green onions, they were massive. He wondered how they could have grown this big in just 2 days. Then it clicked. He remembered seeing on TV how plants change based on where they grow. This had to be the tower's magic at work. That's when a thought hit him: if the green onions grew, what about the other seeds? He scrambled over and saw dozens of tiny sprouts popping out of the ground. He started counting them excitedly. Turns out there were 52 in total. But then he noticed a problem. The huge green onions were casting a shadow over the little sprouts, blocking their sunlight. He realized he had to harvest them. He grabbed one of the stalks and pulled, but this thing was thick. Harvesting it was way harder than he thought it would be. After a lot of work, he finally finished. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the green onion in his hand, wondering what it would taste like. He didn't wait to find out, he just took a bite. The moment the green onion hit his tongue, his whole world exploded in fire. He scrambled to the water, trying to put out the fire in his mouth. This wasn't just spicy, it was on a whole other level. But strangely, even with all that heat, his stomach felt fine. He figured he could get used to it, deciding to dry the rest of the green onions for later. With the green onion situation handled, he turned his attention to the cherry tomatoes. He popped one in his mouth, and just like that, a sound chimed in his head. He looked at the tomato in his hand, feeling pretty good about his little setup. But as he held it up to the light, he noticed something. This wasn't just a normal cherry tomato. He remembered reading about something that happens in the tower. Sometimes the sun gets hidden behind the moon, creating a phenomenon called the blue moon. But that's when the problem hit him. The blue moon was only supposed to happen on the 10th floor. He was so sure he was somewhere near the first. And then he remembered the dragon, that huge, terrifying creature. It wasn't an illusion, it was real. He tried to piece together everything he knew. The top guilds, like Phoenix, had made it to the 37th floor, but any information about floors 30 and up was kept top secret. You could find plenty of information about the lower levels online. Floors 2 through 10 were filled with skeleton soldiers, and floors 11 to 20 had goblins. The 30th floor was home to orcs, and there were rumors that spider monsters appeared on the 31st. He'd heard about all of them: skeletons, goblins, orcs, even giant spiders. But in all that information, there was never a single mention of a dragon. Lying there on that rock with all the pieces not fitting together, only one question remained. Just what floor was he on? The thought finally hit him. Maybe he was lost on a floor that even the top-ranked hunters hadn't reached yet. As he was trying to rest, something dripped onto his face. He sat up, confused. He'd heard the tower usually had perfect weather so it couldn't be rain. That's when he heard a noise from the edge of the pit above him. His eyes went wide, he immediately ducked behind a rock, his heart pounding. It had to be a monster. But when he peeked out, he saw it wasn't some terrifying beast. It was a huge white rabbit drooling as it stared right at him. Sejun was baffled, it was just a rabbit. But this was the tower. Even a rabbit could be a monster. Before he could think, the giant rabbit leaped off the cliff, heading straight for him. Sejun scrambled to get out of the way, yelling for the rabbit to be careful. But instead of hitting the ground, the rabbit landed right on his head. He froze, completely stunned. A moment later, the little guy did a perfect flip and landed softly on the ground in front of him. Sejun just stared, finally understanding that this was no ordinary rabbit. It wasn't trying to attack him at all. The rabbit stopped in front of some giant green onions and pointed at them excitedly. It all clicked, the rabbit wasn't drooling over him, it was drooling over the food. He asked if it wanted to eat one. The rabbit chirped happily, so Sejun snapped off the leafy green part of the stalk. He knelt down and handed it over. The little creature looked absolutely thrilled to get the snack. The rabbit started munching away on the green onion, looking perfectly happy. Sejun sat down on a rock, amused. He told the little creature it could have more if it wanted, since he had plenty. He glanced over at the plants and was shocked. They had already grown so much, he figured he'd have to start harvesting them twice a day just to keep up. But then the rabbit started jumping around and making a ton of noise. Sejun had no idea what was going on. The little guy pointed frantically toward the opening high above the pit. And then with an incredible leap, it shot straight up into the air and disappeared over the edge. Sejun just stared, completely stunned. A moment later, the little rabbit returned, but it wasn't alone. It was leading another, much bigger rabbit that was carrying some kind of pack on its back. The big rabbit carefully set down what it was carrying. It was a straw hat. And it wasn't just the hat. The big rabbit also brought out a brand new watering can. The rabbit with the hat held it out proudly, standing next to another rabbit wearing overalls. Sejun just stood there completely confused. He couldn't believe another rabbit had just shown up. Then he looked at the two of them together and it finally clicked. He pointed and asked if they were a couple. The two little guys just snuggled up close, chirping happily. That was a pretty clear yes. And just like that, Sejun wasn't alone anymore. He now had a couple of rabbits living with him in the cave. With his new companions, the cave didn't feel so lonely anymore. It almost felt like a home. And they got to work right away. The wife rabbit pulled out some scissors and started harvesting the green onions. At the same time, the husband rabbit started watering the new sprouts he'd planted. They worked together perfectly, humming little tunes as they went. Sejun just sat back and watched, amazed. These two were serious about farming. He couldn't help but smile. It was strange, but they really were a great couple. He was still trying to figure out how this all happened when the rabbits suddenly got his attention. They wanted to live here in the cave with him. Sejun was completely taken by surprise. The two of them just looked up at him, their eyes full of hope. They were practically begging him to say yes. He was trying to stay strong, but their cuteness was a direct hit to the heart. He couldn't say no, he stammered out an okay. But he tried to act tough. He told them nothing in life is free. If they wanted to stay, they had to help him with the farm. All they had to do was cut the green onions. The husband rabbit didn't seem to care about the terms, it just leaped into his arms, completely overjoyed. Sejun was caught off guard, telling the little guy to stop being so cute. He let out a sigh. He felt like he was being totally manipulated by these tiny creatures, but honestly, he didn't mind. As he watched them get back to work, he noticed something strange. He asked them if the tools they were carrying were special items. And they were. The watering can the husband rabbit was using somehow had an unlimited supply of water. And the wife rabbit was even crazier. It was like she had a magic pocket that could produce any farming tool they needed right on the spot. Sejun watched them work, feeling a little jealous. He wished he had equipment that good. When the rabbits chirped that they were done, Sejun got up to inspect their work. He saw the neatly cut green onions. The sweet potatoes, on the other hand, didn't seem to have changed at all. But then he noticed the cherry tomatoes. The sprouts were way bigger now, growing incredibly fast. He wondered if the rabbits had something to do with it. He turned to look at the two of them, and somehow they both looked super nervous. The little couple just stood there, holding hands and looking up at him with wide, worried eyes. Sejun let out a little sigh, and then it clicked. He finally understood what was going on. He gave them a big thumbs up. They had officially passed his test. The two rabbits were so happy, they started doing a little victory dance right there. After their celebration, they ran over to Sejun and started chirping excitedly at him. But then they just took off. The husband rabbit shot a huge blast of water into the ground, completely out of nowhere. Sejun just stared, having no idea what was going on. He was completely lost. Turns out the wife rabbit had brought out a shovel. The husband rabbit grabbed it, looking ready to get to work. And he just started digging like a machine, turning over the soil while his wife cheered him on. A little while later, the wife rabbit showed up holding a beautiful wreath made of flowers. She hung it right on the wooden door. It felt like they were really starting to make this place a home. The wife rabbit proudly presented their brand new home, complete with the wreath on the door. Her husband, on the other hand, was completely wiped out from all the work. Sejun stared, completely amazed. He couldn't believe they had managed to build a house so fast. He gave the husband rabbit a big thumbs up, telling him he did an awesome job. The little guy managed to lift a paw and give a thumbs up right back. He looked so incredibly proud of himself. His wife came over and started rubbing his cheek, just as proud of him. She was absolutely beaming. All the attention was making the poor guy blush. A moment later, they were both up and dancing together, completely overjoyed. Sejun just watched from a distance, happy for them. And with that, the door to the rabbit's new home slammed shut. It looked like they wanted some privacy. Sejun just waved them off, wishing the husband rabbit the best. But as soon as they were gone, his smile faded. To be honest, he was a little jealous. He thought about how incredibly boring it had been to be all alone in this cave. But thanks to the rabbits, he wasn't just getting help with the farm, he also had company. He laid back on the pile of leaves, feeling a lot better. He decided to try and start a fire, using a water bottle to focus the sunlight onto the dried leaves. A moment later, a thin trail of smoke started to rise, right from his shirt. Suddenly, he shot up screaming. The genius had managed to set himself on fire. He rolled around on the ground trying to put out the flames. Hilariously, his little accident worked. The pile of leaves was finally burning. After putting out the fire on his shirt, Sejun looked back at the pile of leaves. A thin wisp of smoke was rising from it. Somehow, his crazy idea was working. The plastic bottle was focusing the sunlight perfectly onto the dried green onions. His eyes widened, it was actually happening. He remembered thinking about how grim his situation was. Surviving in the Black Tower was no joke. But he couldn't lose hope, he had to find a way. That's when he remembered an old survival show he'd watched. The host had explained that you could use a plastic bottle as a lens to start a fire. It was his only chance. So he held the bottle steady, focusing the light just like he'd seen on TV. He was just about to give up, thinking it wasn't working, when the whole thing suddenly burst into flames, catching him completely by surprise. Sejun stared at the smoking pile of leaves. He was so close, but it just wouldn't catch fire. He couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. He got closer and started blowing on it gently, trying to give it enough air to ignite. He was sure this was the right way to do it, but something was missing. And then he saw it, a tiny red ember glowing in the middle of the pile. Just as he was about to get excited, he heard something and looked up, startled. It was the rabbit couple. They were standing at the entrance to their burrow, looking worried about all the smoke. The husband rabbit watched Sejun from a distance, trying to figure out what was happening. Sejun was getting desperate. He put his face right up to the leaves and blew as hard as he could, begging for it to finally work. That's when the rabbit couple ran over to him, chirping excitedly as if they were cheering him on. Sejun looked up, surprised to see them right beside him. Sejun looked over at the rabbits and had an idea. He asked if they could help him by blowing on the leaves. The little guys chirped, ready to do their part. The wife rabbit got right up to the pile and started blowing with all her might. Sejun watched, practically praying for it to work. He held up the water bottle, using it to focus the sunlight into a single hot point on the leaves. Everyone watched, holding their breath. And just like that, a small flame flickered to life. Sejun threw his hands up, yelling in excitement. It actually worked. The rabbits looked just as relieved and happy as he did. With the fire finally going, Sejun knew exactly what to do next. He carefully added a piece of wood to keep the flames strong. He took one of the giant green onions and began roasting it over the flames. The two rabbits watched him, curious about what he was making. After a few moments, the onion was perfectly cooked. He pulled it back, looking pretty proud of himself. For the first time in a while, he was going to have a hot meal. The onion was still hot, so he carefully peeled off the burnt outer layer. Without waiting another second, he took his first bite. He bit down, finally getting some real food. The two rabbits watched him, tilting their heads. They chirped curiously as if asking him how it was. The moment the flavor hit his tongue, his eyes shot wide open. It wasn't just good, it was unbelievably sweet. It felt like his whole body was waking up, like running free in a huge open field. He couldn't believe it. He told the rabbits it was seriously, incredibly delicious, and immediately offered them a piece to try. The two of them just stared, a little surprised by his over-the-top reaction. The husband rabbit took the piece of green onion and held it over the fire, ready to cook it just like Sejun had. The two of them took a bite, curious to see what all the fuss was about. And just like that, their eyes lit up with stars. They had never tasted anything so amazing in their lives. Sejun laughed seeing their reaction. He told them to eat as much as they wanted. For the first time in a long time, he was sharing a meal with someone. The next morning, Sejun woke up and stretched, feeling better than he had in a long time. He had a full stomach and a clear head. He made his way over to the edge of the water. He splashed the cool, clear water on his face, washing away the last bit of sleep. Feeling refreshed, he got ready to start his day of work. The farmer walked over to his small plot of land to check on his crops. His first task was already done. The green onion harvest was complete. Next, he finished watering the cherry tomato plants. And finally, he made sure the sweet potatoes had enough water too. His morning chores were done. With his work done, Sejun took a moment to just soak it all in. He felt great. Life was finally starting to look up. He thought about how much had changed in such a short time. After finally figuring out how to make fire, they'd been able to light up the cave. He and the husband rabbit had worked together, turning the giant green onions into torches. It made a huge difference, letting him explore without being stuck in the dark. He realized the area around the pond was still pitch black though. He figured putting a torch there would be a good idea, and the rabbits seemed to agree. As he brought the torch closer to the water, he noticed some ripples. Something was moving down there. Suddenly, a huge fish shot out of the water, flying right at him. He didn't even have time to think. He just swung the torch as hard as he could and smacked the thing right out of the... The fish hit the ground hard, flopping around. He couldn't believe it. Turns out the light from his torch had lured it right to him. Sejun stared down at the fish, completely stunned. He realized he'd never seen any fish in the pond before. It must have been drawn to the light of his torch. It was a pretty big fish and it looked really strange. But for Sejun, it was a miracle. He didn't waste a second. He wrapped the fish in some big leaves and roasted it right over the fire. Once it was done, he sat by the fire just looking at it. He was so thankful to finally have some real protein to eat. He didn't wait any longer. He brought the fish right up to his mouth and took a huge bite. The flavor was incredible. His face just lit up with happiness. He couldn't believe how tasty it was. He was so lost in the moment, he almost didn't notice the two rabbits staring at him. Their jaws were wide open in shock. He looked over at them confused and asked if they ate meat too. The two of them just nodded. He shrugged, figuring it made sense. After all, they were monsters. Turns out he discovered a strange rule on this floor. Every 30 days a blue moon would appear in the sky. At first, he'd used his laptop and a power bank to keep his phone charged, just so he could keep track of what day it was. But eventually, even that reached its limit. After he couldn't use his phone anymore, he started keeping track the old-fashioned way. He'd been here for 61 days. Thankfully, the rabbits had a perfect body clock. They went to bed at 7 p.m. and woke up at 5 a.m., which helped him keep track of the days. And just a few days ago, something really great had happened. He saw the husband rabbit pop out of his burrow and wished him a good morning. But then, right behind him, a whole bunch of tiny yellow baby rabbits came tumbling out. He couldn't help but smile. He felt like he'd just become an uncle. The moment he was out, the baby rabbits swarmed him, tackling him right to the ground in a pile of fluff. He just laughed, completely covered. He happily asked his little nieces and nephews if they missed their uncle. Honestly, he was loving his new role. Life was pretty good these days. Later, he saw the rabbit couple looking completely exhausted. He told them they must be having a tough time with the kids and offered to watch them for a while so they could eat and get some rest. So, with the parents getting a much-needed break, he scooped up the babies and announced they were going to go check on the cherry tomato flowers. He led them over to the field, which was now basically a garden of yellow flowers. The little ones just tumbled around, exploring everything. He explained that for the flowers to actually turn into fruit, they needed to be pollinated. And since there weren't any bees, he was going to have to do it himself, one by one. He took a small stick and gently touched each flower, carefully transferring the pollen. It was slow work, but it was the only way to make sure he'd get his cherry tomatoes. After hours of this, his back was absolutely killing him. He groaned, wishing a bee would just show up and do the job for him. That's when one of the baby rabbits decided to help. It stood on its hind legs and started sniffing the flowers, trying to copy what Sejun was doing. But it got a little too close and ended up with a nose full of pollen. And then a massive sneeze sent pollen flying everywhere. Sejun just burst out laughing, watching the whole thing. He gently picked up the little guy, telling him to be careful not to breathe in the pollen. But then he stopped. His eyes went wide as he noticed something on the plant. It was a fruit. A tiny green cherry tomato had actually grown. All that work, and it finally paid off. He was so happy he started dancing around, holding the little rabbit up like a trophy. They had actually done it. And just in time, to the blue moon was the very next day. The next day, even more tomatoes had started to grow. They were still green, but it was a huge success. The sun was high in the sky. The blue moon was getting closer. Sejun started getting ready. He poured some water over a pile of leaves he'd gathered. Then he got a fire going, tucking it between some rocks to keep it safe. He also started gathering stones, though it wasn't clear what for just yet. Turns out he was making a makeshift ghillie suit. He proudly told the rabbits it would be perfect for camouflage and staying warm. He looked up towards the mouth of the cave. His expression turned serious. It was almost time. He turned to the rabbit hole and waved. He told them he'd see them after they all survived this. The husband rabbit waved back, wishing him luck. Sejun felt totally prepared. He was convinced the blue moon would be a piece of cake. Turns out he was dead wrong. He hid in the corner of the cave, waiting for the whole thing to be over. He'd hidden everything that had a smell, hoping nothing would find him. He had no idea how many hours had passed. Every single minute felt like an eternity. Then he heard awful cries from far away. Even from a distance, the sounds made his whole body tremble. He just prayed it would end without anything bad happening. Suddenly, a sound from right outside snapped him to attention. His eyes shot wide open. He couldn't believe something was that close. This thing was on a whole different level from anything he'd seen before. A giant, red bear was standing right at the entrance to his cave. The massive bear stood under the eerie blue moon, its body practically glowing with power. This thing was on a whole different level from anything he'd seen before. Took a few steps forward, its huge paws landing right in front of his fire pit. The monster was at his front door. The creature ducked its head and walked right into the cave. From the back near his crops, Sejun watched in absolute horror. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure the bear could hear it. The poor guy was completely frozen. He was screwed. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The bear let out a low growl, its eyes glowing an unnatural blue in the darkness. It was definitely looking for something. Sejun was shaking so badly he could barely stay upright, but then he realized the bear hadn't actually spotted him yet. He had to move. As quietly as he could, he started reaching for his bag. He had to get out of there before it was too late. He tried to move as slowly and quietly as he could, but as he grabbed his bag, the strap slipped. His water bottle and all the cherry tomatoes clattered onto the cave floor. The sound was way too loud. He froze. His escape was over before it even started. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't dare to turn around. Slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes wide with dread. And there it was. The giant red bear was standing right over him, looking straight down. He let out a scream. He was completely trapped. The monster roared back, its massive jaws wide open. But he wasn't gone. He was just asleep, completely knocked out cold. The little rabbits were trying to wake him up, but he just mumbled something and kept sleeping. So the husband rabbit decided to try a different approach. He slapped Sejun right across the face. That did the trick. Sejun shot up, his eyes wide with confusion. He looked around frantically, asking what happened. He wanted to know if the blue moon was still out. The husband rabbit just pointed towards the entrance. The sun was shining. It was over. Sejun sat down, trying to piece it all together. He figured he must have passed out from pure terror. His whole body ached. He tried to remember what happened right before he blacked out, and that's when it hit him, the monster. The memory of the monster came rushing back, the sheer terror of it all. He snapped back to reality, his heart still pounding in his chest. He sat there stunned. He had almost been taken out by that monster. The little rabbits gathered around, trying to make him feel better. But the shock had left him freezing cold. He couldn't stop shivering. The wife rabbit saw how much he was shaking and immediately knew what to do. No time, they had a small fire going for him. They even found a huge leaf to use as a blanket. The wife rabbit carefully tucked it around him. Sejun looked up, incredibly grateful for her help. The rabbits had brought him some grilled fish to help him recover. He tore off a piece with his teeth, the food already making him feel a little better. He ate quietly while the little rabbits sat around him, keeping him company. The warmth of the fire and the meal finally started to calm his nerves. But as he ate, his mind started racing. He knew that monster had noticed his cave. He wasn't sure why it left, but he couldn't count on it staying away for good. He'd gotten lucky this time, but he knew the next encounter could be his last. He had worked too damn hard to survive just to let it end like that. He looked down at the fish in his hands. He took another bite. This time he ate with a new fire in his eyes. He was going to live no matter what it took. Just then the husband rabbit started making noises, waving its arms frantically. Sejun turned, wondering what was going on. The rabbit pointed towards the back of the cave, so Sejun looked over to see what the fuss was about. And there it was. One of his cherry tomatoes was glowing with a strange blue light. For someone stranded with nothing, this changed everything. He got closer and couldn't believe his eyes. The thing was already the size of a golf ball. He knelt down to get a better look. He had no idea why it was blue, but it was beautiful. He wondered if it was ready to eat. Without thinking, he reached out and plucked it from the vine. The second he picked it, a blue window popped up right in front of his face. The system told him he'd completed a quest, harvesting a fruit with the energy of the blue moon. Sejun was stunned. He hadn't seen a message window in ages, but that wasn't the only surprise. The next message was even crazier. It said his achievement had gotten the attention of the tower manager, and apparently the manager was not happy about it. Sejun was confused. Why wouldn't the manager be happy? The system then explained that the manager had just found out Sejun wasn't supposed to be there at all. Turns out the manager made a mistake, and now it wanted to hide the evidence. Sejun couldn't believe it. He demanded to know if his being trapped here was just some kind of accident. He completely lost it. He screamed that he'd been living like this for 61 days, and if it was all a mistake, then they should just let him go home. But the next message sent a chill down his spine. The system told him the tower manager was actually thinking about getting rid of him permanently, just to cover up the mistake. Sejun was furious. He just unlocked a huge achievement, and instead of a reward, they were talking about taking him out. He yelled that it was completely unfair. The system went quiet for a moment, just a few dots hanging in the air. He immediately started to worry. Maybe he'd been too rude. That's when a new message started to appear. The system announced that the tower manager was awakening him. Suddenly, a wave of blue energy washed over his entire body. Suddenly, all the fear of being eliminated was replaced with pure excitement. Sejun realized this meant he was becoming an official awakened of the tower. His mind raced with possibilities. Would he be a swordsman, or maybe even a wizard? He eagerly waited for the system to tell him what his new job was. His face lit up with a huge grin. This was the moment that would change his life. Then with a little celebratory firework display, the system announced his new job, Tower Farmer F rank. Sejun just stood there completely still. The rabbits watched him, probably wondering what was wrong. His brain just couldn't process it, a farmer. The system started listing the perks of the job. He wouldn't get sick, he'd be close to nature, and he'd get experience from harvesting crops. But Sejun wasn't listening. He started yelling, demanding to know what it meant by farmer. In a panic, he reached out and shouted for his status window to appear. He had to see it for himself. The status window laid it all out. He was level 1. His talent was listed as ordinary. All his stats, strength, stamina, agility, and magic were at a measly 1. His job was Tower Farmer F rank, and to top it all off, he had 0 skills. He just stared at it, completely stunned. He couldn't believe this was actually his status window. But one thing stood out more than anything else. His talent was just ordinary. That single word hit him like a punch to the gut. All his dreams of being a special hunter were gone. His mind started to spiral, imagining a ridiculous future. He pictured himself on some late-night talk show. In his head, the host was hyping him up, calling him a special guest who cleared the tower even with an ordinary talent. He was telling the audience to give him a huge round of applause. Then the host leaned in and asked the big question, what was his job? Sejun just sat there looking all cool and confident. With a perfect smile, he'd announced to the world that he was the tower farmer. The whole fantasy was just so ridiculous, it snapped him back to reality. He just couldn't accept it. A farmer, all his hopes and dreams gone in an instant. He was losing his mind. In a fit of rage, he grabbed one of the blue cherry tomatoes. He decided he didn't want any of this. He was going to smash it. But just as he was about to throw it, he stopped. The 2 rabbits were standing right there just watching him. It wasn't just the 2 of them. Their whole family was there, looking up at him with these sad, confused faces. That did it. All the fight just left him. He let out a long sigh, completely defeated. Later that night, the fire crackled quietly. Everything was calm. The plants he'd put in the ground were growing strong. Sejun looked down at the blue cherry tomato in his hand. His anger was gone. Now he was just thinking. He held the small blue fruit in his fingers, just looking at it. With a small smile, he looked out at his field. He'd made up his mind. He was going to keep farming. But as he held it, something weird happened. A glowing circle appeared around the tomato like it was being scanned. Suddenly, a blue system window popped up right in front of his face. The system laid it all out. This wasn't just food. It was a magical cherry tomato filled with the energy of the blue moon. And if he ate it, his magic power would go up permanently. His jaw dropped. He realized this whole time he wasn't just growing food. He was growing actual stat-boosting items. He was absolutely ecstatic. He'd actually grown something this amazing all by himself. A huge grin spread across his face as the rabbit celebrated with him. But Sejun wasn't the only one who noticed his achievement. Far away, someone else was watching his little farm very, very closely. This being the tower manager had its eyes locked on him. Back in the cave, Sejun was just happy. He grabbed one of the rabbits and thanked it, saying he couldn't have done any of this without them. But just as he was celebrating, another blue window popped up out of nowhere. The system gave him a new quest. He had to offer the fruit to the tower manager. The reward was a new skill, but when he looked at the penalty for refusing, his blood ran cold. It just said death. He stared at the words, then back at the little fruit in his hand. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Sejun was furious. He yelled at the system window, saying this wasn't a quest, it was blackmail. If the tower manager wanted the fruit, it should have just asked instead of threatening him. He just couldn't get over it. A death penalty for refusing. He wondered how worthless his life must seem to whoever was in charge of this place. But all the anger in the world didn't change the facts. He was sweating, completely terrified. He had no choice. So the poor guy just gave in. He bowed his head, offering the fruit and begging the system to spare his life. He held out his hand, and the magical cherry tomato floated up into the air, disappearing. A moment later, a new message appeared. The system announced that the quest was complete. He looked up, surprised, as another window popped up. It told him his quest reward was ready to be opened. And just like that, his mood completely changed. He'd been so focused on the death penalty that he'd totally forgotten about the reward, a new skill. He laughed, admitting that maybe the tower manager was pretty generous after all. He tapped the open button. A new window popped up, telling him he'd learned sowing level 1. The skill gave him a slightly better chance of seeds sprouting when he planted them. His excitement just vanished. After all that drama with the death penalty, this was his big reward, a skill that barely did anything. But then he remembered, right, his job was a tower farmer. A farming skill for a farmer, it made sense even if it was kind of boring. So with nothing else to do, he just got back to work. But farming wasn't the only thing he had to worry about. He was still trapped and he wasn't alone in the dark. One night, while he was by the underground spring, a huge piranha leaped out of the water, right at him. He didn't even have time to think. He just swung the stick he was carrying as hard as he could. The hit landed square on its head, and the creature went down, flopping helplessly on the ground. The system confirmed it. The creature he'd just taken down was a piranha. And just like that, a notification popped up. He'd gotten 2 experience points for the kill. That was the 5th one he'd caught. For the past few days, he'd been hunting these things just to survive. Turns out, all that work had somehow gotten him to level 2. He thought about catching more, but decided against it. It wasn't smart to wipe out his only source of protein. After cooking up his catch, he gathered everyone around. He called out to the rabbits that it was time to eat, and the whole family came running. He sat with them, telling the little ones to slow down and save some for their parents. These simple moments were how he was getting to know them. He then presented a special portion to the head of the family, the one everyone called the farmer White Rabbit. As Sejun watched them, he started to piece things together. He'd never heard of a farmer White Rabbit outside the tower. It sounded like their entire species was made for farming, not fighting. The two of them were clearly a pair, sharing a happy moment together. That must be why they weren't well known. He figured they must have lost their farm and just wandered until they found this place. He wondered if they even had a home to go back to. He sighed, wishing they could actually understand each other, but trying to talk to a rabbit was pointless. He shook off the thought and stood up, getting everyone's attention. He announced it was time to head to the farm. Today was a big day for them. The little guy looked absolutely fired up, ready to get to work. When they got there, the cherry tomatoes were perfect. They were bright red and practically sparkling on the vine. Everyone just stared in awe. All their hard work had really paid off. Sejun got a little emotional. He told everyone the time had finally come to harvest the fruits of all their hard work. He reached out, announcing that he was going to pick the very first one. His hand moved closer, super careful. Everyone held their breath, watching his every move. He gently plucked it right off the stem. Sejun held it up, absolutely thrilled. It was his very first cherry tomato, and it was perfect. The rabbits all started cheering around him. That's when blue windows popped up. The system told him he'd harvested a well-ripe magical cherry tomato, which gave him both regular experience and job experience points. Turns out, these weren't just normal tomatoes. They were stat-boosting items that could even raise his magic power for a bit. He looked down at the little red fruit in his hand. This was a game changer. He realized that if he ate enough of these, he could permanently increase his magic power. This wasn't just farming, this was a way to get seriously strong. So he started picking more of them, one after another. Each time, the system confirmed he was getting a well-ripe magical cherry tomato. But then he messed up. He accidentally picked one that wasn't ripe enough. The system immediately told him his job experience wouldn't increase, and he got way fewer points. He stared at the tiny fruit in his hand. He finally got it. If it wasn't perfectly ripe, it wasn't a magic item. It was just a normal tomato. So he got back to work, being extra careful this time. Telling the difference between ripe and perfectly ripe was a lot harder than it looked. But all that focus paid off. A system window popped up, telling him he'd hit level 4 and even got a bonus stat point. He'd managed to gather a huge pile of perfect tomatoes. With the hard part done, he decided it was finally time to taste one for himself. Just as he was about to pop it in his mouth, One of the rabbits came up behind him and gave him a supportive pat on the back. But the rabbits weren't having it. They all gathered around looking furious. The one with the hat even stomped his foot like he was ready to throw down. Sejun immediately realized his mistake. He laughed and apologized, explaining that since they all work together, they should all eat together. Even though Sejun tried to cheer him up, the little guy was still pouting, stubbornly holding onto the tomatoes. With that settled, they all sat down to celebrate their first successful harvest. Everyone got their own tomato to enjoy. The rabbits didn't waste a second, happily munching on the fruits of their labor. Finally, Sejun popped one into his own mouth. A small smile spread across his face. It was unbelievably good. But then something else kicked in. His eyes flew open as the magic from the tomato hit him like a lightning bolt. The magic flooded his senses. He fell back onto the grass, completely overwhelmed by the energy. The rabbits gathered around him just as amazed. The taste, it reminded him of something. It was like watching a shooting star on a summer night. Burst of flavor like a firework lighting up the sky. He snapped back to reality, his mind completely blown. The sweet and sour taste was incredible. The feeling was so intense, it was like watching an entire summer fireworks festival. The thought of summer brought a tear to his eye. It was a happy memory, but also a distant one. He looked down at the little fruit that had brought back so many feelings. The two rabbits watched him, looking a little confused by his tears. They looked at each other as if asking what was wrong. The little guy in the hat just shrugged and kept eating his tomato. The little rabbit family was hard at work, carrying out all the cherry tomatoes they'd harvested. The husband and wife rabbit stood proudly over their haul, getting ready for a big meal. After a long day's work, it was time for the family to relax. The little ones played together while their parents watched over them. Sejun watched them from by the fire, a small smile on his face. He thought about how much the kids had grown. They were already big enough to help their parents with the farm work. Feeling sleepy and satisfied, he decided to call it a night. He gave himself a little pat on the back for a job well done. And just like that, he was out cold, sleeping peacefully after a hard day's work. But even in his sleep, the tower wasn't done with him. A new quest popped up. He had to offer 100 magical cherry tomatoes to the tower manager. The reward was another skill, but the penalty for refusal was death. Sejun was fast asleep, but the quest window just sat there on his chest, waiting. Suddenly, the window started flashing and making noise, jolting him awake. Somehow, he was already holding the 100 cherry tomatoes. The system announced that the quest was complete, and the tower manager was satisfied. He was furious about being pushed around, but he opened the reward anyway, praying it was something useful. The reward was a new job-related skill, Harvest Level 1. It promised to make harvested fruits perfect even if they were a little off. Honestly, he was not impressed. But when he actually started working in the field, he realized the skill was way more useful than he'd thought. Turns out, the skill activated whenever he picked a fruit that wasn't perfectly ripe. It would magically finish the job, turning an unripe tomato into a perfect one right in his hands. He got full job experience and regular experience points for it. This changed everything. He didn't have to wait for every single tomato to ripen on the vine anymore. His work just got a whole lot faster. But his moment of relief didn't last long. Another quest window popped up immediately. The tower manager wanted 200 magical cherry tomatoes. Sejun looked at the reward section. It was blank, he was being extorted and he knew it. This guy was just a thief. The tower manager's message was basically, be grateful, I'm giving you anything. So Sejun got back to work, the unfair quest hanging over him. But that was just the beginning. Soon after, another quest appeared. This time for 250 tomatoes, but at least it offered a skill. He couldn't even eat in peace. Another quest popped up, this time demanding 300. The numbers just kept getting bigger. And then came the most ridiculous one yet. 500 magical cherry tomatoes, and the reward, absolutely nothing. His face was blank, he was done being pushed around. He flat out refused the quest. A new message appeared, the tower manager was surprised. He just stood there staring at the window. It was a huge moment for him. For the first time since he got here, he had rebelled. Sejun finally lost it. He yelled at the system window, saying he'd already given up hundreds of tomatoes. He pointed out that he needed to eat them too just to survive. The tower manager's response was cold. The message basically said that was the tower farmer's problem, not its problem. It told him to just shut up and bring the tomatoes. Sejun just smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. He repeated the word in his head. He thought about all the work he'd put into this farm, all the suffering. He reached down and pulled a green onion from the dirt. Another message popped up trying to downplay his effort. The tower manager said he'd only sown the seeds and that it wasn't a big deal. That was the last straw. His expression was firm. He told the system flat out that he refused. He wasn't giving it anything. And just like that, a new message appeared. The tower manager was flustered. Sejun just turned and walked away, the green onion slung over his shoulder. He left the message hanging in the air behind him. He had won. The tower manager was stunned. A new message popped up asking if Sejun was actually serious about refusing the quest. But our boy didn't even flinch. So the manager decided to up the stakes. The next message was a direct threat, warning him that refusal could lead to his end. Sejun just ignored it and kept roasting fish for dinner. The threat didn't scare him, it just made him more determined. He wasn't about to hand over his crops to some creep who dismissed all his hard work. The tower manager tried a different angle. It sent 2 more messages, basically saying it was his job as the tower farmer to obey. It claimed that as the manager, its orders were law. Sejun just stood there thinking about it all. How he'd been forced into these quests, how his efforts were never appreciated, and how he was barely getting anything in return. It was pure exploitation. He looked up, his eyes burning with anger. He told the tower manager exactly what it was, a bad employer. Turns out that was the wrong thing to say. A gigantic, terrifying shadow creature appeared right behind him, its eyes glowing with power. Sejun was suddenly trapped in some kind of energy bubble, completely helpless. The massive creature just loomed over him. It didn't need to say a word. The message was perfectly clear. Turns out the tower manager was a small dragon, watching everything unfold through a glowing purple orb. But Sejun wasn't going to go down begging. Trapped and about to be crushed, he defiantly shoved one of the cherry tomatoes into his mouth. The manager was furious. A message popped up saying it would take him out right now for eating the tomato. But Sejun just kept chewing, completely unfazed. Then, instead of fighting, he tried something else. He offered to hand over 5 tomatoes now and give the rest later. He explained that he couldn't give them all away. He had to feed the other kids too. Behind him, the rabbits were already fighting over their share. This was his final offer, and somehow it worked. A new message appeared. The tower manager agreed to compromise just this once. The message faded and the energy bubble around him disappeared. The danger was over. He thought about the tower manager's last message. It was basically an apology, wasn't it? Turns out, the all-powerful manager was a lot simpler to deal with than he'd imagined. Time passed, it was now day 91. The 4th blue moon had arrived. He sat alone in the darkness, waiting for it to pass. He was on edge, wrapped up tight and holding a single cherry tomato for support. He remembered hearing that high magic power could help someone withstand a monster's roar. He was eating the tomato to boost his stats, praying it would be enough to avoid a repeat of what happened last time. All he could do was hope the night would pass quickly. He huddled in his blanket, facing the long, quiet night alone. But as the blue moon reached its peak, something incredible started to happen. The tomato plants began to shimmer with a strange, magical light. Sejun, still huddled in his blanket, noticed the light immediately. His eyes went wide and his mouth fell open. He was completely speechless. One of the green tomatoes on the vine started to shine brighter than all the rest. And then right before his eyes it changed color, turning a deep, magical blue. He just stared from a distance, completely captivated. He'd never seen anything like it. The shock wore off, replaced by pure excitement. All he could think about was getting his hands on it. The entire cave was filled with this soft blue glow. This blue moon was turning out to be a game changer. Then he noticed it wasn't just the tomatoes. The sweet potato leaves were glowing with that same strange blue light. He knew he had to go check it out immediately. He stood up, still wrapped in his blanket, and walked towards the field. He broke into a run, eager to see what was waiting for him. He got down on his knees and started digging carefully around the base of the plant. The ground was loose, ready for the harvest. And there it was, a sweet potato glowing with the energy of the blue moon. He couldn't hide his excitement. He held it up as a system window appeared. This thing didn't just taste good, it increased his strength and permanently boosted his MP. On top of that, harvesting it maxed out his harvest skill, leveling it up instantly. This was a massive one. Then he saw it. It wasn't just the sweet potatoes. One of the cherry tomatoes was glowing with that same incredible blue light. He reached out and carefully plucked it from the vine. He held the giant sweet potato and the tiny glowing tomato, feeling like he had the whole world in his hands. It was a perfect harvest. And just like that, the good mood was gone. A quest popped up. Unsurprisingly, the tower manager wanted the sweet potato. Then a second quest appeared, demanding the cherry tomato too. Both had no reward and the penalty for refusal was death. This guy was serious. Then the different idea. He decided to finish the last quest he'd been given first, bluffing that Sejun had to give him the sweet potatoes later. The system announced the quest was complete and the tower manager was happy. The tower manager was completely thrown off. A message appeared, basically asking what he was doing. Then the manager tried to save face, bluffing that Sejun had to give him the sweet potatoes later. With the manager stalled for now, Sejun looked down at the 2 glowing items in his hands. He had a choice to make. The choice was obvious. He wasn't giving these to anyone. He popped the glowing cherry tomato right into his mouth. He closed his eyes, savoring every bit of the flavor. A moment later, a wave of energy shot through his entire body. The taste was incredible, like a festival in his mouth. The system confirmed it. He had consumed a magical cherry tomato with the energy of the blue moon, and his MP had permanently increased. With the tomato gone, he turned his attention to the sweet potato. He wrapped it in some leaves and tossed it into the fire. He didn't have any foil, but he figured the onion leaves would do the trick. He sat back, smiling to himself. Turns out, waiting for good food was one of the best feelings in the world. As he waited, he looked up through the opening of his cave. The strange moon hung in the sky. Not far away, a small wooden door set into a hill creaked open. The whole rabbit family poked their heads out, chattering curiously. Something had definitely caught their attention. Sejun grinned, happy to see them. He called out, telling them their timing was perfect. With a huge smile, he proudly presented the sweet potato he'd just cooked. He announced it was a special one, filled with the energy of the blue moon. The rabbits stared at the steaming sweet potato, their eyes sparkling with hunger. Sejun offered to share it with all of them, even though there was only one. But instead of grabbing it, the husband rabbit suddenly jumped back, waving his paws as if to say no. Sejun looked completely confused. He asked what was wrong. The husband rabbit started chattering away, trying his best to explain something. Sejun's eyes widened as he thought he finally understood. He asked if the rabbit was refusing because there was only one, insisting that Sejun should eat it all himself. A tear welled up in Sejun's eye. He was completely touched by the gesture. He told the little guy how moved he was, saying it felt like the rabbit was the only one truly thinking about him. He gave the husband rabbit a grateful pat on the head. Turns out Sejun was feeling a little guilty. He'd already eaten one of the sweet potatoes in secret earlier, and he decided to keep that little detail to himself. So since they wouldn't take it, Sejun announced that he'd just eat it himself. The two rabbits watched him, their eyes wide with anticipation. He took a huge bite of the steaming sweet potato, and he immediately regretted it. The thing was boiling hot. He spat it out, screaming as steam poured from his mouth. The sweet potato fell to the ground, broken into pieces. Sejun was still yelling about how he'd burned his entire mouth. The poor rabbits just stared, completely stunned. But then the husband rabbit's expression changed. A little spark of an idea seemed to flash in his eyes. He called out, and suddenly a whole bunch of little yellow baby rabbits came running. They swarmed around the broken pieces of sweet potato on the ground. The little ones started gobbling up the pieces, happy as could be. The husband rabbit watched them, looking a little teary-eyed but glad that the food wasn't wasted. But it turns out the sweet potato was still way too hot. The little ones immediately started panting, trying to cool their mouths down from the burn. The husband rabbit sprang into action, quickly getting the burning pieces out of their mouths. Sejun just watched the whole disaster unfold. The baby rabbits were crying and their parents looked completely defeated. His one special sweet potato was gone. Later he wrote about it in his diary. The entry was simple, just a note that he'd eaten a fiery hot meal that day. After the whole sweet potato disaster, Sejun gathered the little rabbits. He stood over them with his arms crossed and announced it was time to get to work planting the sprouts. The little guys just tilted their heads, completely confused. Sejun had to explain that the sprouts were from the same food they just tried to eat. And because of that whole incident, he laid down a new law. He pointed right at them and declared that for the time being, eating the sweet potato sprouts was absolutely forbidden. The poor rabbits looked completely heartbroken. The idea of not being able to eat the sprouts was just too much for them to handle. So they started throwing a full-on tantrum. They were clinging to his leg, crying on the ground, and making a huge fuss. But Sejun wasn't backing down, telling them their complaints were useless. Seeing that yelling wasn't working, he switched tactics. He leaned in and offered them a deal, help him plant the sprouts, and he'd give them some special snacks later. He put on his most convincing face, really selling the idea of how amazing these snacks were going to be. And just like that, the bribe worked. The mention of special snacks completely changed their attitude. Their eyes lit up and they were already drooling at the thought. Sejun looked at the little rabbits, all holding their sprouts and ready to go. He clapped his hands and told them it was time to get moving. A little later, Sejun was watching one of the rabbits harvest green onions. He stopped the little guy and asked him to leave one plant behind, explaining that if they let it flower, they could get more seeds from it. He realized that for the crops to officially register as items in the tower system, he had to be the one to plant the seeds first. With the plan set, the little rabbits got to work. One of them started digging a hole with surprising speed. As soon as the hole was ready, another rabbit hopped over, carrying one of the sweet potato sprouts. It carefully placed the sprout right into the center of the hole. Then it patted the dirt down around the base, making sure the plant was secure. Soon, the whole field was a flurry of activity as the little ones planted sprout after sprout. The husband rabbit followed behind with a watering can, giving each new plant a good drink. Meanwhile, one of the baby rabbits was holding a big leaf, drooling a little bit. It looked ready for a snack, and it started happily munching away. But that's when the husband rabbit showed up and gave the little guy a smack on the head. The baby rabbit cried out as the leaf fell to the ground. A little while later, Sejun was harvesting the magic cherry tomatoes. They were finally ripe, and he was gathering a whole bunch of them. And just like that, the system notifications started rolling in. He'd harvested ripe magic cherry tomatoes, which increased his skill level and gave him experience points. He even leveled up and got a bonus stat point. Turns out his job experience was full. He'd leveled up from a tower farmer level F to level E. He realized that if he just kept harvesting, he could get strong really fast. With his work done for the day, he decided it was time for a snack. He started putting the fresh tomatoes on a skewer to roast over the fire. As he got ready to cook, another message popped up. The system let him know that the tower manager was watching him, curious to see what he was going to make. Sejun paused, looking over his shoulder at the system window that just appeared. He just sighed, realizing the tower manager was spying on him again. He didn't seem too bothered by it though. Putting the thought aside, he waved over to the rabbits, calling out that it was time for snacks. A whole crowd of baby rabbits came running too. He promised them all they were in for a real treat. He proudly presented his creation, special roasted cherry tomato bone skewers. Turns out, roasting them on the clean piranha bones made the tomatoes even sweeter and softer. And the rabbits absolutely loved them. They all started munching away, completely thrilled. He reminded them that they were easy to carry around and eat, but they had to blow on them first. He definitely didn't want a repeat of the hot sweet potato disaster. With snack time over, his attention turned to dinner. He saw that the sweet potato sprouts were all planted and decided it was time to dig some up. Sejun knelt down and started digging into the soil with his bare hands. He pulled up the vine and was completely shocked. A whole bunch of sweet potatoes were attached. The system popped up with a description. These were strength sweet potatoes. Eating one would boost his strength stat by 0, one for 10 minutes, and he could stack the effect up to 10 times. He laid them all out and started counting. He'd managed to get 15 sweet potatoes in total, about 5 from each plant. For first harvest, that was pretty amazing. As he looked at his haul, he noticed the leftover sprouts on the ground. He carefully picked one up and planted it back into the soil. A couple of baby rabbits watched as he patted the dirt down. He wasn't about to let a single one go to waste. And just like that, a system window appeared. It told him he'd successfully planted the sprouts, and his sowing skill had gone up a little. He was surprised that even replanting something counted. He had a terrible thought. To level up his skill, he'd have to plant every single one of these sprouts himself. Just then, the little baby rabbits started trying to help. Sejun quickly stopped them, insisting that he'd be the one to do it. Far away in a huge library, a massive black dragon was sitting among piles of books. She was holding a skewer of bright red, shiny fruit. She held it over a fire, roasting it carefully. Then she brought the skewer up to her mouth, ready to take a bite. But the second she tasted it, she spat everything out. She yelled that it was horribly bitter. A moment later, though, her expression changed. Turns out, only the outside was bitter, the inside was incredibly sweet. She decided it was delicious after all, and her tail started wagging happily. The dragon decided she'd had enough fun. It was time to use her crystal ball and see what the human was up to. The orb lit up, showing Sejun sitting on the ground, happily eating a roasted sweet potato. The dragon froze. She started sweating, completely stunned. She couldn't believe it. Then the rage hit. She was furious that they were roasting sweet potatoes without her, the great black dragon alien Fratani. Meanwhile, Sejun was just enjoying a nice snack with the rabbits, totally unaware of the drama he was causing. That's when a blue window popped up right in front of him. The system announced that an additional quest had been triggered. The quest was simple: give one roasted sweet potato to the tower manager. The reward was nothing, but if he refused, the penalty was death. Sejun just froze, a piece of food still in his mouth. He had absolutely no idea what was going on. Sejun wasn't sure what to do. He tried to just postpone the quest, hoping the problem would go away. But the tower manager was not having it. The system popped up again, demanding the sweet potato and threatening him. Sejun realized he only had one left, so this dude decided to bargain, asking what he'd get in return. The system just paused for a moment, as if it was thinking. Then the quest updated. Turns out the tower manager was willing to play ball. The reward was changed from nothing to a job-related skill. The penalty for refusal, of course, was still death. A job-related skill was a pretty good deal. Sejun immediately agreed and offered up the sweet potato. The system window confirmed the quest was complete. He tapped the screen to open his reward. The reward was a new skill called Seed Store. It would let him buy a product from a special shop once every 30 days. This was huge, a seed store, the ability to actually buy things inside the tower. Sejun was so happy he could barely believe it. He started laughing, thanking the tower manager for giving him such an amazing skill as the rabbits celebrated with him. Sejun was beyond excited. Without wasting a second, he reached out and activated his new seed store skill. System window popped up, confirming the skill was now online. The system immediately started checking his shopping history. Unsurprisingly, it found nothing. Sejun just thought to himself, of course I don't have any history, I just got here. But that's when the reality of the situation hit him. He had access to a store, but he had absolutely no money. He started to panic, wondering if he could just trade for things instead. But the system had a surprise for him. A message appeared, congratulating him on being the very first customer of the seed store. As a special reward, it was giving him 1 tower coin to get started. Another window explained that the coin would be put into his account at something called the seed bank. Suddenly, a glowing blue object materialized right in front of him. Sejun just stared, completely stunned. Was the tower coin real and sparkling? This one little coin was about to change everything for him. Sejun's mind raced. He realized the tower coin was the currency used inside the tower, and it was worth a fortune. He immediately opened the seed store, wondering what he could possibly buy. A series of messages appeared. The system explained that because he was a rookie, it would show him 3 random types of seeds. But there was a catch: at his current level, he could only buy 1. 3 options popped up in front of him: red pepper seeds, cabbage seeds, and carrot seeds. Each one cost 1 tower coin. He stared, a little surprised by the selection. He sat down to think it over. Just like the name suggested, the store only sold seeds. He did the math in his head and realized they were incredibly expensive. He immediately ruled out the red pepper and cabbage seeds. It was pointless to grow them since he couldn't make kimchi out here. So that left only one option. He focused on the last choice, ready to make his purchase. The rabbits all gathered behind him, watching curiously. But just as he was about to select it, the husband rabbit suddenly started waving its paws and making noises. Sejun turned around, completely confused, asking what was wrong. It suddenly clicked. Sejun looked down at the rabbits and asked if they wanted him to buy carrots. The rabbits' eyes lit up like stars. They started drooling and hopping around, squeaking with pure joy. He grinned, realizing he'd made the right choice. The whole family, even the little yellow one, was jumping up and down. The entire group started chanting for carrots. Their excitement was getting a little out of hand. In fact, the husband rabbit got so worked up that he launched himself into the air and smacked Sejun right across the face. With that settled, a message popped up from the system. He had successfully purchased 1,000 carrot seeds. Another window confirmed that 1 tower coin had been taken from his seed bank account. But then he got a bonus. The system told him he'd earned seed shop mileage and that he could use it to raise his level. This was a game changer. The system explained that he needed 100 mileage points to level up. A moment later, a little red pouch materialized in front of him. He held the pouch, realizing the bag itself was more expensive than the seeds. The system then told him he couldn't use the shop again for 30 days. Then another message popped up. For some reason, the tower manager was satisfied with his purchase. Sejun had no idea what that was supposed to mean. With his new seeds, Sejun was ready to get to work planting the carrots. But as he and the rabbits got started, someone else was watching from the leaves. It was a tiny bee buzzing quietly as it watched them. The rabbits were so excited, they just sat there waiting for the carrots to grow, wiggling their little tails. A few days passed and things were peaceful. While Sejun relaxed on a rock, the entire rabbit family just camped out in front of the field. The husband and wife rabbit were having a nice little moment together. He watched them, thinking about how they'd been like this all day, every day. The seeds hadn't even sprouted yet, but they were completely obsessed. He figured he'd take a quick nap. Later, he planned to pollinate some flowers and cut onions. But as he was sleeping, that tiny bee from before showed up. It flew right up to his ear and started buzzing loudly. The sound started to bother him even in his sleep. He mumbled and tried to swat it away. Finally, he shot up, completely startled and annoyed, yelling about the bug that woke him up. He sat up and saw the little bug that had woken him. It was just hovering there right in front of his face. And honestly, it was pretty cute. His annoyance melted away instantly. He thought it was the cutest thing he'd ever seen. He wondered if it was some kind of bug monster and tried to call it over. That's when a system window popped up identifying the creature. It was a poison honeybee. The word poison hit him like a truck. His face went pale. He scrambled back, pointing at the bee. He tried to yell a warning to the others, telling them it was dangerous. But it was too late. The entire rabbit family came charging in, looking happy as can be, completely unaware of the danger. Sejun completely lost it, screaming at the rabbits for abandoning him with this thing. Then another system window appeared. The tower manager explained that these bees were carnivorous, hunting monsters with poisonous stings to eat their flesh. Sejun couldn't believe it. A bee that eats meat? That's not a bee anymore. As the bee flew closer, he frantically waved his hands, telling it to get lost. The bee started glowing with a dark energy, and Sejun fell back in terror. He started begging for his life, telling the creature he was nothing but bones and wouldn't be a good meal. In a last-ditch effort, he grabbed one of the green stalks growing nearby. He squeezed his eyes shut and threw it, hoping the bee would eat that instead of him. But the bee didn't go for the stalk. Instead, it just hovered over the yellow flowers on the plant he'd thrown. The little creature just stared at the flower, looking completely fascinated. Turns out, it wasn't dangerous at all. Sejun rubbed his eyes, completely confused by what he was seeing. The bee wasn't attacking at all, it was just happily drinking from the flowers. It looked so happy, like it was having the best meal of its life. Sejun sat there completely baffled. He remembered the system message and wondered if it was wrong. This thing wasn't acting like a meat eater. Then it hit him, he suddenly realized something important. His fear was completely gone. He smiled and called out to the little bee. He pointed to the rows of plants, telling the bee it could have as many flowers as it wanted. The little guy started buzzing excitedly, flying from one flower to the next. It seemed like Sejun had just made a new friend. Sejun got this huge, scheming grin on his face. He realized that with this little bee around, he wouldn't have to pollinate the cherry tomatoes by hand anymore. That's when he noticed the rabbits peeking out from behind a rock. He turned and called them out, asking if they really had the nerve to come back after running away and leaving him behind. The rabbits all rushed over, trying to get his forgiveness. But Sejun just turned his back on them, pretending he was still mad and telling them to leave him alone. Suddenly, the little bee zipped right in front of his face. Sejun was surprised, asking if it was already done eating. But the bee didn't stop there. It flew right over and landed on him. Sejun got all nervous, telling the little guy it was getting way too close. Before he could react, the bee just crawled right into his shirt pocket and snuggled in. Sejun was completely frozen, not sure what to do. The little thing just stretched out, making itself perfectly comfortable like it owned the place. And then it just fell asleep right there on his chest. Sejun watched it for a moment, admitting to himself that it was actually pretty cute. He looked down at the bee in his pocket. He was still a little worried it might sting him, but he figured it didn't matter. It looked like his family had just gotten one member bigger. And just like that, the days turned into weeks. The farm was thriving. Everyone had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Sejun and the rabbits worked side by side, taking care of the crops together. Of course, the younger rabbits were more interested in playing than working. He had to shoo them away so he could actually get something done. He watched them run off, smiling to himself. He figured it was good for them to just be kids and have fun. A moment later, his littlest helper flew back and landed on his shoulder. The bee had been with them for a few weeks now. The little guy had a set schedule, go out in the morning to gather nectar, then come back in the evening. Sejun figured it must be about time for lunch. He stood up and called out to the rabbits that it was time to eat. He guessed the bee wasn't planning on going back to its old hive anytime soon. Sejun was grilling up some green onions for lunch when the bee landed on one. To his surprise, it started spitting out honey all over the onion. Turns out, the little guy had started making its own honey just a few days ago. A system window popped up, officially naming the new creation, Honey Onion. The combination of the grilled onion and the bee's honey made for special treat. Sejun took a bite and his eyes lit up. It was incredibly sweet and delicious. The rabbits were loving it too. He laughed to himself. He admitted that at first he was totally freaked out, thinking the bee was poisonous. But now, thanks to the little guy, he was able to get honey and expand the farm. He got excited just thinking about it. In a few months, he'd have so much honey he wouldn't even be jealous of the bears. That's when another message popped up, telling him the tower's manager was happy for him. He turned around, a little confused by the message. But that thought was quickly replaced by a more serious one. He suddenly remembered something important and wondered if the blue moon was coming soon. Sejun looked up at the cave opening, his mind filled with worry. He just hoped this blue moon would pass by safely. The day after it passed would be his 51st day trapped here. He focused on gathering the last of the food he'd need. He figured this should be enough food to get through it. He also noticed the poison honeybee hadn't come by, guessing it was also preparing for the blue moon. He turned and saw the rabbits. They seemed especially anxious today, all huddled together and squeaking. He knew it was almost time. He called out to the rabbits, telling them it was time to go home. But before they followed, the entire rabbit family pulled into a tight huddle. The parents held their little ones close, bracing for whatever was coming. Sejun watched them, totally confused by what was happening. Then out of nowhere, the parent rabbits just took off. They sprinted away at full speed, leaving their babies behind in a strange fiery glow. Sejun could only watch as the two of them scrambled straight into their burrow. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. They turned back from inside the burrow looking completely happy. The husband rabbit even waved goodbye. And then they slammed the door shut, locking themselves inside. Sejun was freaking out. He yelled at the closed door, asking how they could just abandon their babies right before the blue moon. But it was too late, the sky went dark, the blue moon was here. A strange blue light washed over everything. Sejun just stood there staring up at the sky, completely stunned. Stared his apart eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't process what was happening. That's when he saw it, the baby rabbits. They weren't babies anymore. They had turned into huge, terrifying monsters with glowing red eyes, and they were tearing each other apart. The poor guy was sweating, completely terrified. He just couldn't wrap his head around what was happening. But then the horrible vision just shattered. The monstrous forms dissolved into a soft, beautiful light. Turns out they weren't monsters at all. They were just floating there, happy and safe. The scary red eyes and sharp claws were gone. All that was left were these cute little guys. Sejun just stared, completely stunned. He stammered, trying to ask what happened. He finally got a good look at them. They had grown into adult rabbits, and their fur had even changed color. One was now a deep blue. And then it all made sense. He realized this was their 5th blue moon. This wasn't a curse, it was like a coming-of-age ceremony for them. The relief was so strong he just started sobbing. He told them he was terrified something horrible had happened. The little blue rabbit seemed to understand and gently patted his arm to comfort him. He was so happy he started chasing them around, trying to give them kisses to make up for how scared he'd been. The rabbits, of course, were having none of it. As the sun came up, the strange blue light faded. The long night was finally over. That's when the burrow door creaked open. The parent rabbits who had locked themselves away finally came out. They saw Sejun and the others sitting by the fire. The whole family was finally back together. Sejun watched them all, feeling a huge sense of relief. He decided right then that they needed a proper coming-of-age feast to celebrate. One of the rabbits heard him and immediately started waving its paws excitedly. But then the little guy did something incredible. A bright light flashed and a shovel just appeared in its paw. Sejun's jaw dropped. He realized that becoming adults didn't just change their size, it gave them actual powers. It wasn't just one rabbit. All of them started summoning items. One got a sickle, another a cart, then a watering can and a shovel. Sejun was floored. He asked them if they could all just summon things now. He started to put it all together. So, when a rabbit becomes an adult farmer, it gets its own special item. He then realized he couldn't just borrow them, which was a little disappointing. That's when he turned his attention to the little black rabbit who hadn't summoned anything yet. He asked what its item was. The little guy puffed out its chest proudly. With a happy squeak, a bright light started to form in its paw. And then a huge wooden hammer appeared out of thin air. Sejun was completely confused. He pointed out that a hammer wasn't exactly a farm tool. But then something clicked. He suddenly understood what was going on. Turns out this little guy wasn't a farmer at all. A system window popped up, identifying it as the Black Rabbit Warrior. This one was a fighter. The next morning, the sun came up, and a new day began on the farm. And the new adult rabbits, they got to work right away. They were already out in the fields watering the crops. They were all naturals. One was harvesting green onions with a sickle, moving like a pro. Others were already gathering the harvest, digging and hauling tomatoes without any instruction. Sejun directed them where to put the piles of food. The farm was running like a well-oiled machine. He got a little emotional watching them. The tiny babies he'd been looking after had grown up so well, and they were even helping with their parents' work. He was so proud of them, but then he noticed one of them was missing from the workforce. It was the warrior. While everyone else was busting their tails, this dude was just chilling, snacking on tomatoes. He was completely useless. Sejun was trying to figure out what to do with the warrior rabbit. Its job was to fight, but there were no monsters in the cave, and a hammer wasn't exactly a farming tool. Just as he was stumped, the little warrior's ears perked up. It had an idea. The rabbit excitedly suggested that it could hunt fish in the pond. After all, hunting was a kind of fighting, and it was eager to be useful. Sejun loved the idea. He laid out the plan. He'd use a torch to lure the fish to the surface, and the rabbit would handle the rest. He told the little guy to show him the power of a warrior. So Sejun got to work, waving the torches over the dark water to attract whatever was lurking below. Didn't take long. A massive fish shot out of the water, drawn by the light. That was the signal. Sejun yelled for it to attack, and the warrior rabbit launched itself into the air. The little warrior swung its hammer with all its might, aiming right for the fish. The hammer connected with a huge impact, sending a shockwave through the air. The warrior rabbit had finally found its purpose. The warrior rabbit landed with a thud, its hammer held high. Sejun just stood there, his mouth hanging open, completely stunned by what he just saw. The little guy proudly presented its catch to Sejun. The problem was, it was just a fish skeleton sitting on a leaf. The meat was completely gone. Sejun was absolutely horrified. The rabbit's hammer swing was so strong it had basically blasted all the meat right off the bones. The only thing left to eat was a pile of fish eggs next to the skeleton. So Sejun and the whole rabbit family gathered around their unique meal. The poor warrior rabbit looked pretty down about it, but Sejun encouraged him. He said not to be sad, that he'd get better with practice, and for now it was time to eat. And just like that, time passed. The rabbits started getting used to their roles, helping out around the farm. Before he knew it, it was the 125th day and a message appeared. The seed store was open. Sejun's eyes lit up. He'd been waiting for this. The system showed him 3 random seeds that were being sold, but there was a catch. At his current level, he could only purchase one. Sejun looked at the new seeds for sale. There were watermelon, sweet pumpkin, and waxy corn seeds. But his jaw dropped when he saw the prices. They were completely different from the last time he checked. He checked his balance and saw he only had 9 tower coins. That was barely enough for the waxy corn seeds. He started to worry if prices kept going up, he wouldn't be able to buy anything next time. and he had no way to earn more money stuck in this. He started thinking about how hunters usually make money. The first way was clearing a floor. You get a huge reward, but it's in one-time thing, so it's not a reliable income. The second and most common way was hunting monsters and selling their remains to merchants. That's how most hunters made a steady living. The third method was completing quests for rewards. Sejun thought about his options. Out of all of them, clearing the floor was completely impossible. He couldn't even escape the cave. Then an idea hit him. He remembered the ridiculous quest the tower manager had given him. He looked up and called out, asking the tower manager if he could get the reward for that quest right now. The system's response was completely useless. The tower manager basically said it would give him the reward later when he was grown up. Sejun was baffled. He yelled back, asking how old this manager even was. The manager just replied that its age was a secret, so Sejun asked how many years he'd have to wait to be considered grown up. The answer was basically, a very, very long time. Sejun completely lost it. He realized he'd have to pass this IO down for generations. He screamed that he couldn't even have kids right now, making the whole thing a cruel joke. But after a moment, he just let it go. He knew getting angry was a complete waste of energy. He decided to focus on what he could actually control. Right now, the only thing he could afford was the corn seeds. He figured corn wasn't a bad choice anyway. He started thinking about all the ways he could cook it steamed, grilled, or even ground into flour. With his mind made up, he bought the waxy corn seeds. The system confirmed the purchase and told him he'd earned some mileage points. A moment later, a small red pouch appeared right in his hand. He opened it up and poured the corn seeds into his palm. It was time to get back to work. Sejun showed the new corn seeds to the husband rabbit, asking if they looked good. The little guy seemed excited. With his new seeds in hand, he got the whole rabbit crew fired up. It was time to get to work. But then his stomach growled. He stopped everyone, realizing they should probably eat something before they started planting. So they got a fire going and started cooking up some fish. After the meal, everyone was completely stuffed. Sejun decided he'd dry the rest of the fish and save it for later. Just then, his little honeybee friend showed up. Sejun greeted it, asking if it was okay to be away from its hive for so long. The bee just nuzzled up against his cheek. He laughed, telling the little guy it was welcome to stay here anytime. But then the bee's antennae twitched. It heard something rustling nearby, and its expression changed completely. The bee suddenly shot forward, sensing something. Sejun looked up, startled, as the black rabbit grabbed its hammer, ready for a fight. Sejun's first thought was that a monster was attacking. The little rabbit let out a battle cry, not backing down an inch. But then a voice came from the bushes. It was a cat, and it was begging them not to misunderstand, swearing it wasn't there to steal their food. The whole crew gathered around Sejun. He was still on edge but asked the cat why it had come here. That's when an orange cat just leaped right out of the bushes. It landed perfectly right in front of him. The little guy raised its paw in a friendly greeting. Then it spoke, asking if he was Park Sejun. Turns out this was Theo, the wandering merchant. The cat puffed out its chest and gave a huge, friendly smile. He announced that his name was Theo and he was a wandering merchant. Sejun just stood there looking down at the tiny merchant. The black rabbit was still on guard, hammer ready, while the bee hovered in the air. This was a huge moment. After all this time being stuck here, a merchant had finally appeared. The little cat looked up at Sejun and asked if he was the customer, Park Sejun. The black rabbit at his feet still looked suspicious. Sejun was stunned. He'd heard stories about wandering merchants in the tower, but he never ever expected one to be a cat. Suddenly, all thoughts of business vanished. All Sejun could focus on were those big shiny eyes and chubby cheeks. He even found himself staring at its little paws. And that's when it became obvious. Turns out Park Sejun was a massive cat person. This was his ultimate weakness. Sejun had to take a moment to get himself together. He cleared his throat, confirmed his name, and asked the merchant what he wanted. Theo explained that he'd heard a rookie was making purchases at the seed store. So, he came to say hello and maybe make a few deals. He told Sejun he had some pretty good items, and then pulled out a purple pouch to show him. But right as he was about to start his sales pitch, Theo's stomach let out a huge growl. The little guy froze, completely embarrassed. He quickly apologized to Sejun, admitting he hadn't eaten anything all day and felt bad for making a scene. The poor cat tried to laugh it off nervously, but Sejun just stared at him. And that's when a wicked grin spread across Sejun's face. He saw his opening. He called out to the merchant, confirming his name was Theo. Then with a gentle smile, Sejun held out a perfectly roasted fish and asked if he wanted some. The cat's eyes went wide, filling with tears. The smell hit him and he was completely lost. His little paws reached out, desperate for a bite. But his merchant pride kicked back in. He pulled his paws back and insisted he couldn't possibly take a customer's food. But Sejun wasn't going to let him off that easy. He held the fish right up to Theo's nose, describing how perfectly cooked and delicious it was. He told the little guy it was all for him. And that's all it took. The merchant's pride vanished in an instant as he dove face first into the meal. A little while later, Theo was passed out on the ground, completely stuffed, with a tiny fish skeleton resting on his belly. Sejun watched him from the campfire. The little guy had eaten 5 whole fish. He must have been starving. Once he recovered, Theo stood up and thanked Sejun over and over for the meal. Sejun just smiled, saying he was the one who was grateful that a merchant had finally come all this way. With that settled, Theo got ready to talk business. But before he could start, Sejun held out his hand and asked for some tower coins. The cat looked completely confused. With the friendliest smile you've ever seen, Sejun reminded the merchant that he had to pay for the 5 fish he just ate. Turns out, the free meal wasn't so free after. Theo couldn't believe it, asking if the meal wasn't free. Sejun just calmly explained that there's no such thing as a freebie in this world, reminding the cat that he came here to make a deal. With a friendly smile, Sejun asked if a merchant was really going to eat his customers' fish and then just run away. Theo started sweating, completely cornered. Defeated, the poor guy handed over a half-tower coin card with tears streaming down his face. Sejun happily took it, thanking him. Sejun was ecstatic. He'd finally earned his first tower coin. In the background, Theo looked like his entire world had just collapsed. The little merchant was devastated. He came here to take the customers' money, but instead he was the one paying. His business had started at a total loss. But then a fire lit up in his eyes. He refused to be defeated like this. He declared that it was his turn now and told Sejun to take a look at his items. He grabbed his big purple bag, ready to show off his goods. And with a flourish, he presented the hot items from another floor. A tumbler, a mini fan, and a little green mat. And for his grand finale, he presented a portable hand warmer, priced at 5 tower coins. Sejun looked at all the stuff laid out on the mat and immediately recognized them. He asked if these were items from outside the tower. Theo puffed out his chest, proud that his customer noticed. The little merchant started his big sales pitch, holding up the tumbler. He claimed it had special preservation magic to keep drinks hot or cold. Next, he moved on to the mini fan, saying it was enchanted with wind magic. He flicked it on to show how it worked. But before Theo could even finish his sentence, Sejun cut him off. The cat looked up, confused, asking what was wrong. Sejun didn't waste any time. He just told him straight up that every single item he brought was complete trash. Theo completely lost it, yelling about how these were valuable items from outside the tower. But Sejun just calmly told him that he was from outside the tower too. That one sentence completely shut him down. The poor guy was just stunned, realizing he'd been trying to scam someone who knew exactly what this junk was worth. Sejun started breaking down the scam piece by piece. He held up the tumbler and explained that it didn't have any magic at all. It just used a vacuum seal to keep things from getting hot or cold. Then he moved on to the mini fan. He told Theo that both it and the hand warmer would just stop working in a few hours once their batteries ran out. Theo completely refused to believe it. He insisted that the seller, a guy named Scarum, swore they were magic, but right on cue the fan sputtered and died. The little merchant started freaking out, smacking the fan and yelling at it to move. Sejun just calmly told him what was now obvious. He'd been scammed by that Scarum punk. And just like that, the truth hit him like a truck. The poor guy couldn't believe it, whispering that Scarum had seemed so kind. His sadness quickly turned into a massive tantrum. He started pounding the mat, screaming that Scarum was a bad goblin and wondering why he always got scammed. Seeing the little merchant completely fall apart, Sejun gently patted his back. He softly asked Theo to tell him what happened. Through his hiccups, Theo began to explain. He told Sejun he was from the 75th floor, which was one of the tower's neutral zones. So Theo started his story. For a long time, he'd had a huge crush on a girl named Meryl, who he thought was the most beautiful cat in his village. He finally worked up the courage to confess, bringing her a bouquet of roasted fish. But her reaction was brutal. She looked disgusted, complaining about the smell of cheap fish. Then she just slapped the entire bouquet right out of his paws. The poor guy was stunned. He couldn't believe it, asking her why she'd do that after he'd worked so hard to get those fish just for her. That's when his rival showed up. A guy named Oren, the son of the richest cat in the village. This clown laughed and mocked Theo for even trying to get Meryl's attention. Oren shamed him for bringing such a low-grade fish, then presented Meryl with a huge, high-quality salmon. He even pointed out that Meryl doesn't like greasy food anyway because she's watching her weight. And just like that, Meryl was completely smitten. Her eyes lit up, and she thought the salmon was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It was just too much. The poor guy was completely crushed. Oren laughed and invited Meryl over to his house for salmon steak. They just walked off together, leaving Theo behind as he begged them to wait. He reached out, begging Meryl to wait. He grabbed her wrist, desperately asking if all the memories they shared were just a lie. But Meryl just turned to Oren, who looked smug. Theo saw tears in her eyes and asked how she could deny everything when she was clearly upset too. He couldn't stop thinking about the good times they had, those unforgettable days. But that memory just made her angrier. She slapped his hand away. Her face twisted with rage. She screamed at him, saying he was delusional for thinking she ever liked him. She told him he was annoying and ordered him to stop following her. Then she hit him. As he went flying, she screamed that she hated poor cats like him who smelled of cheap fish. The memory of her words just crushed him. He was completely heartbroken. He explained that after that, he decided to run away. He was going to become a wandering merchant, get rich, and get his revenge. Sejun and the rabbits just listened to the whole sad story. He told them he used his entire life savings, 50 tower coins, to get the license and equipment he needed. He was ready to start buying and selling things. That's when he met someone. A voice asked if he was the new wandering merchant. The guy introduced himself as Scarum. He acted all friendly, offering to help the new guy out. Scarum leaned in and told him about a special deal. He had items from outside the tower. He claimed they were super valuable. If Theo took them to the upper floors, he could make a fortune since the creatures up there loved to collect that kind of stuff. Theo, being naive, asked why he was selling them so cheap. This scumbag just grinned and said it was a special favor, a senior helping out a junior because he'd taken a liking to him. Scarum played his final card, threatening to give the items to another merchant. Naturally, the poor guy panicked and immediately agreed to buy everything. This scumbag then slid a map across the table, acting like he was doing Theo a huge favor. He claimed it was the location of a new seed store user, a chance to make a huge profit. To top it all off, he even got Theo to promise to buy him a beer later. And just like that, Theo gave all his money to Scarum. He starved himself just to make it to the location on that map, hoping to finally sell something. He was completely broken. Back in the present, he was just a mess on the ground. He cried that all the items were worthless and that he'd lost everything, feeling like a total failure. Sejun listened to the whole story. He realized this cat was just a complete pushover. But then he paused. An idea sparked in his mind. He remembered something about how he could get a tower coin. Sejun tried to calm the little guy down, offering him some roasted fish. But Theo was still crying, accusing him of trying to trick him into paying for it later. He insisted he wasn't stupid. Sejun told the little guy not to worry about the cost. He said the fish was free and everything Theo had eaten before was a treat. The cat's eyes went wide in disbelief. Then Sejun made his real offer. In exchange for the food, he wanted Theo to work with him. He kneeled down and started laying out the details of his plan. He had a big friendly smile, explaining exactly what he had in mind. And just like that, our boy was already writing a new entry in his mental diary. He'd found a pushover. No, he corrected himself. He'd found a partner. He looked incredibly pleased with this new arrangement. Theo was completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked if Sejun really wanted to work with him. Sejun confirmed it, explaining that he needed a good merchant to sell his items, still unsure of himself. Theo asked if he was really good enough for the job. The poor guy hung his head, reminding Sejun of his story. He called himself an useless newbie merchant who couldn't do anything right. But Sejun disagreed. He told Theo that he actually had a great ability. In fact, his storytelling was so good it had just landed him a business partner. Theo looked up confused, so Sejun grinned and confirmed it. They were officially business partners. And to celebrate, the rabbits had apparently built them a tiny beach resort, complete with lounge chairs and an umbrella. Sejun was already kicking back, drinking straight from a hollowed-out watermelon. The whole crew was there, just chilling and enjoying the moment. Once they were settled, Sejun got back to business. He laid out the facts. Theo had been tricked, his items were worthless, and he had no money to start over. The little guy could only admit that it was all true. So Sejun laid out his business proposal, calling it a win-win for both of them. The plan was simple. Theo would take his items and sell them to other people. In return, Sejun would give him a cut of the profits. Theo seemed curious about the details. Sejun explained that he had to sell the items for more than the base price Sejun set. He was confident Theo could sell them for a much higher price, telling the cat he had a real talent for it. His cut would come from the final sale price he managed to get. But Theo was getting suspicious. After being scammed once, he wasn't about to fall for another bad deal. He started doing the math in his head and it didn't sound good. The little guy put on a tough face, asking if Sejun thought he was stupid enough to get tricked again. But Sejun just smiled, admitting he'd forgotten to mention the most important part of the deal. He called out to the rabbits, telling them to bring it over. Theo just watched, completely confused about what was happening. That's when two of the rabbits, all dressed up in flowers and leaf skirts, presented him with 2 perfectly grilled fish. Sejun explained that this was the real deal, a weekly payment of 10 grilled fish or the coin equivalent. Theo was floored. The sight of the grilled fish was just too much for him. Sejun leaned back, totally relaxed, and made his final offer, asking if Theo was ready to sign the contract. Theo tried to stay strong. He remembered the creeps who scammed him, telling himself he couldn't be deceived like that again. But his resolve was already melting. The thought of all that fish was just too much. The little guy tried to play hardball, saying that if Sejun gave him some grilled fish, he'd think about it. Sejun's face lit up with a massive grin. He knew he had him. He declared that he was in a great mood, so he'd give him not just 10 but 5 extra fish. Theo couldn't believe his eyes. His eyes started to sparkle. The sheer amount of grilled fish was more than he could have ever imagined. Then Sejun delivered the final blow. He explained that on top of his weekly pay, Theo could eat as much grilled fish as he wanted whenever he was here. He leaned in and repeated it just to make sure it sank in. As much as he wanted, the deal was done. The words echoed in Theo's head. That was it. He was completely sold. The little guy was practically vibrating with excitement. Without a second of hesitation, Theo asked if Sejun had paper for contract. Turns out he did. Sejun produced a scroll and a feather pen. It was time to make things official. Sejun picked up the pen with a smirk. He was clearly enjoying this. He wrote down their names, Party A Park Sejun, Party B Theo. And just like that, the contract was complete. Both of them looked pretty happy with the arrangement. But then, reality hit Theo like a ton of bricks. He'd been so blinded by the promise of fish that he signed without even thinking. He tried to protest to take it back, but it was too late. The contract flew out of his reach. The deal was done. The scroll glowed with a strange blue light. The tower system was making it official. This wasn't just a piece of paper anymore, it was a binding magical agreement. That's when Theo finally got a look at the details. It was a lifetime contract. He was bound to sell Sejun's crops forever. His payment, 25 grilled fish a week, but the weirdest part was a special condition. He had to use a Naya accent when selling things. Sejun explained that contracts inside the tower were made to be unbreakable for a reason to make them valid. But Theo was just spiraling. He couldn't believe he'd signed his first real contract in such a stupid way. The poor guy finally snapped out of his despair long enough to focus on one detail. He angrily asked what the Naya accent was even supposed to be. He found the idea totally embarrassing. Sejun just gave him a friendly pat and a grin. He told the little guy he'd understand when the time came and that they should just focus on doing well together. But Theo wasn't having it. He pointed out the escape clause. If his sales fell below 5 tower coins a month, the contract would be terminated. He saw a way out. Sejun wasn't worried at all. He just smiled and told Theo the crops would sell themselves. Then he gave the cat a new title, Saleskit Theo the Resourceful. And just like that, all his worries vanished. The little guy loved the name. Sejun just watched, thinking to himself how simple this cat was. He had his new partner wrapped around his finger. With the contract signed, Theo finally asked the most important question. What kind of things was he even going to sell? Sejun just smiled like it was no big deal. He told him it was just cherry tomatoes. Theo's eyes went wide. Cherry tomatoes, that was the amazing product he was supposed to sell. Sejun held one up. It looked bright red and perfectly normal. He led Theo out to the field, surrounded by rows of tomato plants. The cat pointed at the tiny fruit, still not believing this was the merchandise. Theo took one and inspected it. Turns out it was a magical cherry tomato that could increase a stat called imp for 10 minutes. He started doing the math, figuring he could maybe sell it for a tiny price to some newbie hunter. Then Sejun told him the price, 0.05 tower coin per piece. Theo completely lost it, yelling that no idiot would ever pay that much for one tomato. And then a sly look crossed his face. He realized this was actually a good thing. If the price was too high, he wouldn't sell anything. That meant his sales would be too low, the contract would be broken, and he'd get to eat free grilled fish the whole time. This little guy thought he'd found the perfect way out. Still trying to work his angle, Theo asked how many tomatoes he should take for the first sale. Sejun's answer was simple, 1,000. The rabbits had already gathered a massive basket of tomatoes and a huge pile of grilled fish. Sejun pointed to the pile, explaining he'd also prepared 25 grilled fish as the first week's payment. But then he asked the obvious question, how was a tiny cat supposed to carry all this? Theo confidently pulled out a purple cloth. He explained it was a magic item called the bundle with spells for preservation, space expansion, and making things lightweight. He tossed the bundle towards the huge pile of food. Blue vortex of magic erupted, sucking all the tomatoes and fish inside. A moment later it landed on the ground, now a full bag tied neatly at the top. Sejun just stared impressed. Turns out his new partner had some pretty useful tricks. Theo proudly strapped the bag to his back, ready to go. Theo promised he'd be back and then headed off. Back at the cave, Sejun and the rabbits waved goodbye as he made his way down. A few days passed, the story shifts to the 38th floor of the tower. Down there, a huge, terrifying monster was on a rampage. A team of hunters was trying to take it down. The leader shouted for his team to corner the creature. The hunter at the front easily blocked the monster's attack with his glowing sword. From the back, two mages launched a fireball right at the beast. At the same time, the leader swung his blade, slicing clean through the monster. The monster's head hit the ground. The fight was over. The party cheered for their leader, a guy named Kim Dongshik from the Phoenix Guild. One of them praised his sword skill, saying it was all they needed to win. Dongshik told his team to cut the praise and wrap things up. He specifically called out a woman named Jessica, warning her not to cheat like she did last time. He just sighed, a little exasperated by her. But then his expression changed. He heard something in the distance. He immediately got into fighting stance, his hand glowing with energy. He yelled out, demanding to know who was there. That's when a small figure stepped out from the trees. It was Theo. He waved a paw and asked if they wanted to see some good stuff. Naya. Dongshik just stared down, completely confused. A cat. The entire party gathered around, looking at the tiny merchant. Theo just stood there and greeted them all politely. The women in the group immediately lost it. They started gushing over how cute he was, especially when he said something. Theo, of course, played right into it. Before Theo left, Sejun gave him one last piece of advice. He told him to use a special accent when talking to humans to grab their attention. For Theo, it all suddenly made sense. So back in the present, Theo put on a show. He announced his arrival and proudly presented his basket of goods to the hunters. The hunters looked down at the basket, completely confused. One of them picked up a tomato, wondering what it was. Their leader, Dongshik, wasn't impressed at all. He asked why the cat was trying to sell fruit instead of real food like bread or meat. But Theo just smiled, acting like he knew a secret. He told the foolish humans that these were different from any cherry tomatoes they'd ever seen. He told them to check the stats. The hunters were shocked. Stats? This was an item, not just food. The hunter pulled up a system window. It was a magic cherry tomato that gave a tiny boost for 10 minutes. The buff seemed pretty useless, so he asked how much it cost. Theo calmly stated the price was 0.05 tower coin per piece. The hunter exploded, yelling that it was a total ripoff. He'd rather spend his money on actual equipment. The hunters were ready to leave, thinking it was a waste of time. But then, one of the women in the group suddenly stopped. She was still staring at the item description. She'd spotted something everyone else missed. A tiny line of text said that eating one would make you lose 10 grams of fat. She must have said it out loud because suddenly the entire crowd went silent. Everyone turned, completely shocked by what they'd just heard. Immediately, everyone pulled up their own system windows to check. It was true. They could lose weight just by eating, and they could have up to 10 an hour. This wasn't just a buff item, it was a game changer. The mood flipped instantly. A huge, muscular guy slammed his hand down, demanding to buy the entire basket. Another woman yelled that she wanted 100 of them. Theo was completely stunned. It turned into a full-on fight. People started shouting at each other, each one claiming they were going to be the one to buy the tomatoes. One guy even called out his friend for trying to get some while bulking up. Our boy Theo, caught in the middle of it all, just tried his best to get everyone into a line. Even the hunters who had been walking away were now rushing back to buy some. Meanwhile, back on the 99th floor, Sejun was just picking another tomato. That's when two system messages popped up. He had leveled up and gained a bonus stat. Turns out his new partner was already making him stronger. Sejun was working in the field, wondering how Theo was doing. He was pretty sure the cat must have already met the hunters by now. He knew the tomatoes looked like a simple magic boosting item. But their real power was that they could dissolve fat and refresh the body, the best diet product anyone could ask for. Plus, there were no side effects and they were delicious. He was absolutely sure this was going to be a huge hit. He clenched his fist, putting all his faith in one simple fact: people will always buy diet products. And it turns out he was right. Miles away, Theo stared at an empty basket and a bag overflowing with coins. He'd sold every single one. Back on the 99th floor, things were growing, but not everything was going as planned. Sejun sat with one of the rabbits looking over the new sprouts. He explained that out of 1,000 carrot seeds he'd planted, only about 700 had actually grown. It was the same story with the magic cherry tomatoes. He'd planted 1,200 seeds from his last harvest, but only 732 were growing. Turns out the corn and sweet potatoes had the same issue. No matter what he planted, only about 60 to 70% of the seeds were actually sprouting. He wondered if it was because his tower farmer level was still too low, or maybe the soil in the cave just wasn't very good. For now, he decided he just had to keep trying. The stakes were higher now. With Theo out there earning tower coins, they needed to harvest as many crops as they possibly could. That's when he heard something. He and the rabbit whipped around to see what it was. A flaming spear flew right past them, hitting the ground with a thud. They were under attack. The little black rabbit ducked just in time, and the flaming spear flew right over its head. The attack came from a bunch of angry-looking fish monsters jumping out of the water. They were all coming straight for the little guy. The rabbit dropped its stick, getting ready to fight back. In a flash, every single one of the fish was taken down. Turns out the little rabbit had a hammer. It picked up the flaming spear and stood over the defeated fish, completely unharmed. Sejun and the other rabbits arrived to see the aftermath. He looked at the pile of defeated fish and praised the black rabbit, telling it that its hunting skills were getting really good. Just then, the black rabbit started to glow with a bright blue light. Sejun realized what was happening. It was leveling up. Sejun was thrilled. He congratulated the little guy, explaining that while he'd seen the white rabbits level up from farming, this was the first time he'd seen the black rabbit level up from a fight. He told him he was becoming a real hunter. The black rabbit stood there proudly as the two little white rabbits clapped for him. He was officially the hunter of the group now. Sejun knelt down, smiling at the scene. He decided that after all that excitement, it was time for a well-deserved break. And he had just the thing. He pulled out a tumbler, announcing that they were all going to have some coffee. He twisted the lid off, revealing a bunch of instant coffee packets neatly stacked inside. He grinned, remembering how he got this. Turns out, Theo and some goblin named Scarum had completely overlooked it and didn't even bother to open the tumbler. Honestly, if Theo were the one selling this stuff, Sejun knew he'd probably spend every last coin he had just to buy some. But thanks to their ignorance, he got it all for free. He started pouring the powder into a bottle of water. Even without ice or a way to boil it, this was a total luxury out here. But he had one last special ingredient. He gently petted the little poison bee as it added a drop of honey to the mix. With a quick thank you, the drink was finally ready. He called his new creation the Honey Americano. It was a simple mix of coffee powder, cool cave water, and a drop of the poison bee's honey. But the combination was special. It could get rid of both hunger and tiredness with just one sip. Sejun took a huge gulp. It was amazing, the perfect mix of bitter and sweet. He looked down at the little black rabbit, the new hunter of the group. Smiling, Sejun offered him a taste. The little guy hopped forward and took a curious sip from the straw, and he immediately spit it out, his whole body recoiling from the taste. Sejun just burst out laughing. He figured that a rabbit's tongue was probably way more sensitive to bitter flavors than a human's. Just then he heard a buzzing sound from above. He looked up and saw the poison bee near its hive. He waved and called out to it. The bee immediately turned and started flying down towards him. The poison bee buzzed happily, bringing its entire hive with it. Sejun stared completely surprised. He pointed up, realizing the bee wasn't just visiting him. He was so happy. He told the bee that now they could finally feel like a real family and immediately decided they were going to have a party to celebrate. But just as the celebration was about to start, a new quest popped up. The system wanted him to give 10 magic cherry tomatoes to the tower's manager. The reward was none, and refusing would just lead to disappointment. Sejun just smiled. He figured the manager must have seen his deal with Theo. The old threats were gone, replaced by what was basically a sad request. He was actually starting to feel a little bad for them, so he decided to give them some. He held out a leaf with the tomatoes and the quest completed instantly. But the system message was different this time. The tower manager was actually thanking him for his kindness. Sejun couldn't help but feel satisfied. Getting a thank you from the tower manager felt like a real win. But his good mood was cut short. He suddenly froze, his eyes wide with surprise. Something else was happening. The feeling of victory vanished. Sejun slumped against the wall, instantly regretting his decision. He couldn't believe he'd just acted like a total pushover. Meanwhile, far away from the quiet farm, business was happening as usual. Inside a noisy tavern, a mug slammed down onto a wooden table. A group of goblin merchants were sitting around a table. The one in the fedora looked annoyed, wondering out loud why that cat hadn't come back yet. His friend laughed, asking if he meant the pushover who bought all his junk last time. He congratulated the merchant on being smart enough to trick the poor guy so easily. The goblin merchant explained that it had been a long time. He was confused because the cat hadn't come back to the guild to complain about being unable to sell the items. He sighed dramatically, claiming that since he was such a good guy, he wouldn't be able to just ignore the cat if he showed up again. In fact, he had a whole plan. He was going to buy the cat a glass of milk, tell him about a huge opportunity, and then lend him the money to do it. His friend just stared, completely speechless. The goblin merchant, Scarum, laid out the rest of his plan. He'd give Theo a loan with such high interest that the poor cat would never be able to pay it back. The end goal, Theo would become his slave for life. This scumbag was enjoying every second of his own evil plan. His friends were completely blown away. One of them called Scarum a genius and urged him to find Theo immediately, saying it's not easy to find someone that gullible. But Scarum just waved them off. He told them to relax, acting all cool and saying you shouldn't chase your prey too recklessly. Then this clown decided it was time to check the wandering merchant sales rankings for the day. He pulled up a system window right there at the table. He proudly pointed to his name on the screen. He was ranked 999th with a total of 45, 2 tower coins. His friend was super impressed, gushing about how awesome it was that Scarum made it into the top 1,000. The poor guy admitted he wasn't even on the rankings at all. Scarum just smirked, saying that's what happens when you sell junk to pushovers. Then he started scrolling up the list, already planning who he was going to beat next. He kept scrolling up the list, but then he saw something that made him freeze. Rank 204, Theo, 50 tower coins, brand new. Scarum couldn't believe his eyes. His friends started whispering. They recognized the name. It was the same cat Scarum was planning to trick. But his ranking was way higher than Scarum's. Scarum slammed his fists on the table, absolutely furious. He was in total denial. There was no way Theo could have sold that junk. He couldn't understand what was happening. His shock was already turning into something else. This scumbag looked like he was plotting something much worse now. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the goblin's rage, Theo happily announced his return. Sejun was in the field with the rabbits when he heard the cat's voice. He looked up, surprised to see Theo running towards them. Sejun was just happy to see him, but Theo immediately started apologizing. He promised that next time, he wouldn't get distracted and would come straight back after selling everything. Sejun was confused. He asked Theo what he meant by playing around. The cat admitted he'd been gone for 4 days, but that didn't make any sense. Sejun remembered Theo saying a round trip would take at least 10 days, so how did he have 4 extra days to play after selling everything? That's when it hit him. He'd expected it to take a few days to sell the tomatoes, but for Theo to be back this fast, it meant they sold out the moment he arrived. Sejun grabbed Theo by the scruff of his neck. He gave the poor cat this absolutely terrifying grin and told him he'd better start talking if he wanted to avoid trouble. Theo, sweating bullets, immediately agreed to tell him everything. So they all sat down in the field, and Theo began to explain what happened. And after a little while, the cat finished his story. Sejun was still processing it. Theo just explained that he talked to the hunters for a bit and they bought everything. Then he proudly presented a big bag of tower coins. He looked at the coin in his hand. This was just the beginning. Sejun handed Theo 2 tower coins as a bonus for his work, but he called him Employee Theo, which caught the cat off guard. Theo asked what happened to his fancy sales kit title. Sejun explained that he'd been demoted for taking 4 days off to play around. He offered a deal, work hard next time and he'd get his title back plus a bigger bonus. Theo immediately promised to do better. Then Sejun asked about his new way of talking. Theo explained that he was adding Naya to his sentences because it seemed to make humans like him more. A huge grin spread across Sejun's face. He boasted that soon everyone in the tower would know his name. Theo looked confused. He started to explain that the farmer's name was actually listed in the cherry tomatoes item description. Sejun just grinned, finishing the thought for him. He said that's exactly how people would find out who he was. And that's when it hit the poor cat. His eyes went wide with pure terror. He was in so much trouble. But there was one tiny detail Sejun had missed. Turns out the tower has a rule for beginner merchants. To protect them from having their suppliers stolen, the system automatically hides the producer's name on any items they sell. So on the item description for the cherry tomatoes, Sejun's name was completely blacked out. Theo knew this and he was absolutely terrified. If Sejun found out, he'd be demoted from employee to intern, maybe even just a part-timer. Sejun noticed the cat was frozen in fear and asked him what was wrong. The poor cat started laughing nervously, insisting that nothing was wrong. He immediately asked for more cherry tomatoes so he could get back to work. Sejun was confused by the sudden rush, telling him to take a few days off and collect his weekly pay. But Theo just kept laughing, yelling about how busy they were. He grabbed a bag and started helping a rabbit load a wheelbarrow with tomatoes, trying to create as much chaos as possible to avoid talking. That's when he realized there was only one way to fix this. He had to get rid of the restriction on his merchant account. To do that, he needed to earn 1,000 tower coins and become a mid-level wandering merchant. That was his new mission. Sejun watched him go, completely puzzled. A small black rabbit stood beside him, but Sejun was just thinking. He was starting to suspect that his new employee was hiding something. Meanwhile, on a lower floor of the tower, a group of hunters were talking. One of them was telling a story about some amazing cherry tomatoes, but his friends weren't buying it. Just then, the phone of the big guy in the black shirt went off. It was a message from his daughter. She was telling him how great the cherry tomatoes were and that all her friends were jealous. She sweetly asked if he would buy her more. The message hit him hard. The big guy started crying tears of pure joy. He explained to his confused friends that his daughter was always annoyed because she was struggling with her diet. But because of those tomatoes, she just told him she loved him. Dongshik was kicking himself. He'd only bought a few last time, leaving the rest for his team members. That's when his friend realized he was talking about the cherry tomatoes sold by that wandering cat. Another guy jumped in with his own story. Apparently, he gave some of the tomatoes to a girl he liked, and now they were dating. That's when the first guy, the one they didn't believe, mentioned that he still had a few left. Instantly, the others swarmed him, desperately asking to buy them. The dad was practically begging, offering thousands for a single one. Dongshik looked at his friends, thinking hard. He knew they couldn't just sit around. He had to do something for his daughter. Suddenly, he snapped into action. He ordered everyone to get the rest of the team. They were heading to the 38th floor right now. One of his guys immediately started complaining, arguing it was too soon and the others would be angry. But just as he was protesting, someone else arrived. It was Jessica and her team. Hilariously, they were already striking a pose, looking more than ready to go. Dongshik was completely stunned to see them. Jessica announced that they were all prepared. She quickly corrected herself, saying they had the coins ready for the expedition, definitely not for buying cherry tomatoes. Her teammate chimed in, agreeing they were totally ready to defeat the spider monster. That was all the motivation Dongshik needed. With his whole team cheering behind him, he yelled for them to follow his lead. Dongshik marched forward with absolute resolve. This wasn't just about a mission. He was going to get those magical cherry tomatoes and be the best dad ever, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, far away on the 99th floor, everything was peaceful. The only sound was a faint meow carried on the wind. Meanwhile, Theo was on a mission. He walked through the fields, his mind set on one thing, earning 1,000 tower coins. He did the math in his head. His bag could only hold so many tomatoes, which meant he'd have to make over 10 trips. He shook off the thought, deciding to just focus on making money as fast as possible. He soon reached a familiar clearing. This was the spot where he'd seen the humans gathered last time. He scanned the area looking for potential buyers. Turns out someone was already watching him. Hiding in the bushes, a pair of hunters had finally found their target. They stepped out into the open, and the woman immediately started waving and yelling for everyone else to come over. The cat merchant was here. Theo asked if they were looking for him. The hunter explained that they didn't know when he'd show up again, so they'd been waiting nearby for the past 3 days, all just to buy his magical cherry tomatoes. The poor cat was floored. He couldn't believe they'd wait 3 whole days just for some fruit. The hunter started to confirm the price, but before he could finish, Theo held up a paw. He told the man to stop right there. He announced that actually the price had gone up. The hunters were shocked. The commotion started drawing in more people from the area, all wondering what was going on. One of the hunters explained the situation to the others. The lead guy then turned to Theo and asked him how much they cost now. With a huge, confident grin, Theo announced the new price, 1,000 tower coins per tomato. And then the confidence vanished. He started sweating, suddenly terrified he'd raised the price way too much. But the lead hunter didn't even blink. He just dropped a massive bag of coins and ordered 200 of them. Theo was absolutely stunned. That's when everyone else jumped in. They all agreed that an item this good shouldn't be cheap, and they started shouting their own orders, worried they'd missed their chance. In an instant, it was over. He had completely sold out again. Even after jacking up the price, all 1,500 tomatoes were gone. The lead hunter asked when the cat would be back. Theo told him he'd return to the same spot in about 10 days. The hunter smiled. He said that was perfect. It would give them just enough time to finish a quest and come back with more money. With that settled, the guy rallied his team. They were all fired up to go finish their spider quest and get out of the tower. Theo watched them go, looking absolutely thrilled. He'd found regular customers. At this rate, he figured he could earn those 1,000 tower coins in no time. He just had to become a mid-level merchant. Then he could finally reveal his vendor's name and get his proper title back. That's when someone called out to him. He turned around to see a group of women. One of them stepped forward and politely asked if he was Mr. Cat. The women started talking to each other, pointing out how he looked really similar to something. Theo just stood there looking completely unamused. Theo cut them off, telling them his name wasn't Mr. Cat, it was Theo. The woman looked embarrassed and quickly apologized, introducing herself as Suha. Theo asked what she meant by him looking like another cat. Suha just explained that he reminded her of a cat she used to know. This dude puffed out his chest and said she must be mistaken. He claimed to be the only handsome cat in the world and tried to walk away, saying he was busy. Suha quickly called out for him to wait. That's when she pulled out a small red packet. Theo stopped and looked at it suspiciously. She smiled and asked if he wanted to try a cat snack. Theo scoffed, asking what that even was. He insisted that he only ate grilled fish, but she was already feeding it to him. The moment it hit his tongue, his eyes shot open. It was incredible. It smelled like fish, but had a nutty taste that just melted in his mouth. He'd eaten the whole thing in seconds and immediately begged for more. Suha just smiled, holding up a few more packets. She had different flavors. The cat was practically begging now. Suha saw her chance. She told him she'd give him more, but only if he took a picture with her and her friends. Theo didn't even hesitate. He agreed as long as he got all of the snacks. Suha held up her phone, getting ready to take the picture. She told Theo to look at the camera and say peace. With the deal done, Theo trotted off, happily licking his lips. He was full of snacks and feeling pretty good about himself. As Suha looked at the photo, her friends commented on how cute Theo was. One of them mentioned that she'd never seen anyone bring cat snacks into the tower before. Another friend pointed out how nice it was to see Suha smiling like that. She asked if Suha would come back to see the cat again next time. Suha just smiled and said of course she would. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Sejun was in the middle of some special training. He was teaching the black rabbit how to swim. He knew the rabbit was probably worried about the piranhas in the water. He told the little guy to relax his body and hold the green onion tube out in front of him. He cheered him on, saying he was doing a great job. To be safe, Sejun had blocked the hole where the fish came from. He checked it a few times, but honestly, he was still a little nervous. He told the little guy to try swimming without the tube now. This was a huge improvement, especially compared to the time the rabbit got so excited about leveling up that it just jumped right in the water. The memory was still vivid, the little rabbit floating away and the piranhas swarming in from below. Sejun had completely freaked out. He shuddered just thinking about it, but now everything was fine. The black rabbit was happily splashing around and the others were just chilling in the water. After all that swimming, Sejun was craving something sweet. He got out of the water and reached into his bag looking for the honey he'd collected. But when he pulled out the container, it was completely empty. Turns out he'd already finished it. That reminded him he hadn't seen the poison bee since it moved a few days ago. He wondered if something had happened. That's when he noticed a strange yellow glow coming from the cave. He jumped back startled. The black rabbit stood guard, its eyes glowing red. Something was definitely up. He peeked inside and saw a bunch of tiny bees buzzing around a giant honeycomb. A system window popped up, identifying them as the poison bee's babies. Sejun was shocked. He realized it had been a while, but he had no idea the poison bee had been this busy. She had a whole family now. He decided he should probably congratulate her. It felt like the right thing to do for a neighbor. But he couldn't just show up empty-handed. He needed a proper housewarming present. He looked at his plants and got an idea. He picked a bunch of fresh tomato flowers and walked up to the hive. Two of the baby bees peeked out curiously as he called for their mom. He waved, asking if she could come out for a moment. The two rabbits stood by him, watching as two larger bees guarded the entrance. He held up the flowers, explaining that he'd brought a housewarming gift for her and the new babies. But instead of a friendly welcome, the bees went into attack mode. Their eyes glowed red and they buzzed angrily, telling him to back off immediately. Sejun was completely caught off guard. He just brought a gift and now these little bees were swarming him. The black rabbit thought they were under attack and started powering up, ready to fight. But then a voice came from inside the hive. It was the mother bee. She was yelling frantically, telling them not to fight because they weren't enemies. Sejun quickly grabbed the black rabbit, trying to stop it from swinging its hammer. The queen bee was also yelling for the rabbit to stand down. It was a total mess. The problem was the baby bees weren't listening to anyone. They were still buzzing furiously, their eyes glowing red. They all swarmed towards Sejun. But just as they were about to strike, the queen bee let out a powerful buzz from the hive. And just like that, the baby bees stopped dead in their tracks. Sejun looked up and saw the queen bee herself had finally come out. He stared at her for a moment and then it clicked. He pointed, asking if she was the same poison bee he'd met before. And there she was. She hadn't just gotten bigger, she'd completely changed. She was holding her babies in her arms, looking more like a queen than just a bee. System window popped up, confirming her new title, Queen Poisonous Honeybee. Sejun and the little black rabbit just stared, completely stunned. He could hardly believe this was the same bee he knew. Sejun tried to make sense of this. He remembered reading about poison bees. They were supposed to be aggressive, venomous monsters that hunted their prey without mercy. Far away, the tower administrator was watching everything through her crystal ball. She frantically flipped through her official guidebook, trying to find an answer. But the book had nothing. There was no explanation for a monster evolving into a queen and starting a family inside a tower resident's home. She decided that since nobody seemed to be in danger, she'd just keep watching for now. This was way outside the normal rules. Besides, she had a feeling that even if this was weird, there was probably a simple solution to it all. Back in the cave, the situation was still incredibly awkward. Sejun stood there holding flowers, the black rabbit was ready for a fight, and the queen bee just floated there with her kids. Finally, Sejun just pointed at her. He asked if she was really the same tiny, cute poison bee he remembered. In response, the queen just beamed at him, looking incredibly happy. That friendly reaction was the last thing he expected. Both Sejun and the little black rabbit stared, completely baffled. This was not how monsters were supposed to act. The queen bee struck a pose, clearly proud of her new look. She seemed to be asking if he thought she'd changed a lot. Her expression softened. It was clear there was a whole story behind this change. Turns out it all started back when she was just a regular poison bee. Every time she ate nectar, her body started to change. She gave off a strong scent and she was getting bigger than the others. This made her own queen and the rest of the hive really suspicious of her. But she quickly figured out why they were treating her differently. The reason was simple. She had developed the ability to lay eggs. In a bee colony, there can only be one queen. So she knew she had to leave and go independent. She needed to find the safest place she could think of to start her own hive. And for her, that place was Sejun's cave. The queen bee explained that she had chosen Sejun's cave as her new home. It was the safest place she could think of. But once she was settled, she had to endure a lot of pain inside her new hive. She went through several painful transformations, each one more intense than the last. And then she finally broke through. Her body had completely changed, and that's how she became the Queen Poisonous Honeybee. With her story finished, Sejun smiled. He congratulated her on becoming a queen, even if the timing was a little awkward. He held out the flowers as a present. The queen bee just stared at them, completely speechless. Then she let out a happy buzz and flew right into his arms, giving him a big hug. It seemed his gift was a huge success. The queen bee just nuzzled right into his arms, buzzing happily. She was basically a giant fuzzy flying cat at this point. Her babies just watched from a distance, probably confused but curious. And then all at once the rest of the bees swarmed him. They weren't attacking though, they were just clinging to him. Sejun laughed, telling them he liked them too. It looked like everyone was going to get along just fine. A few days later, that peace was broken. Suddenly, an urgent cry echoed from outside the cave. The rabbits were frantically shaking Sejun awake. They were clearly panicked about something. He grumbled, complaining that he'd hoped to sleep through the blue moon this time. The husband rabbit just kept pointing, urging him to get up. Sejun followed his gaze and saw it. Down on the field, a strange plant was glowing with a purple light. Sejun realized it was a carrot that had soaked up the blue moon's energy. He hadn't expected it to change since it was still so small, but this was a huge win for him. He could harvest it way sooner than he thought. He looked over at the cheering rabbit and grinned. He teased them, saying so this was why they were rushing him. He told them it was time to pull it out and grabbed the carrot firmly. With a strong pull, the carrot came right out of the ground. The rabbits all watched, completely amazed. He held it up, surprised by how big it was. A system window popped up, calling it an agility carrot. The system explained everything. This carrot didn't just taste good, it permanently increased agility by 0.05 when eaten. It was an E+ rank crop, and the message also said his job experience and harvesting skill had both gone up a lot. This was a huge deal, an E+ rank crop. He started to wonder if harvesting better plants like this meant he'd get real experience points from now on. Then he remembered the carrot wasn't really his. He turned to the rabbits and held it out, thanking them for all their hard work. He told them he hoped they'd keep helping him out in the future. The rabbits all gathered around the carrot, their eyes sparkling. This was their prize and they were so proud of it. But now they had to split it. The job went to the sickle rabbit. The little farmer rabbit held up the carrot, ready for the first cut. The little guy jumped back just as the sickle came swinging down. But this rabbit didn't just chop it once. With a smug little look, it unleashed a flurry of cuts. With insane speed, it sliced the carrot into perfect equal pieces while it was still in the. The other rabbits just watched, completely stunned. This rabbit was a true master. Each piece landed perfectly, one for every rabbit who helped. Sejun was completely blown away. He clapped and praised the sickle rabbit for its amazing performance, even giving it a new title, Sickle Chef. The rabbits enjoyed their hard-earned reward. The sickle chef looked especially proud, munching on its slice of the magic carrot. Meanwhile, Sejun was checking on his crops. He noticed something unusual on one of the tomato plants. Turns out, his plants had produced 5 of these special blue moon cherry tomatoes. He gathered them all carefully. Suddenly, a system window appeared. The quest was complete and the tower manager was thanking him. He told the manager that if they were really thankful, they should give him another skill. The manager's reply wasn't exactly what he was hoping for. The system said they'd think about it and give him something later. Sejun was not impressed. He couldn't believe the manager was being so vague and just wanted a straight answer. Just then he heard a familiar panic cry. It was Theo. The little cat came sprinting into the cave, looking absolutely terrified as he was chased by a swarm of angry poison bees. He screamed for Sejun to call them off. Sejun watched the bees swarm Theo and then it clicked. Theo had been gone when the baby bees were born. To them, he was just some random intruder. So Sejun scooped up the little cat and held him out for the bees to see. He explained that Theo wasn't an enemy, he was family. Theo, of course, was just loving the attention. A second later, the cat let out a huge sneeze, getting fur all over Sejun's face. After Sejun wiped it away, Theo gratefully called him Brother Sejun. Sejun was not having it. He grabbed Theo's cheeks and reminded the little guy that he was just an employee and shouldn't get too familiar. Theo whined back that Sejun had just told everyone they were family. To get things back on track, Sejun switched to business mode. He told employee Theo it was time to settle the accounts and asked for the money from the cherry tomato sales. The cat proudly presented a heavy bag. He opened it up and saw it was packed with gold coins, a total of 75 tower coins. Sejun looked genuinely impressed and told Theo he'd done a great job. But that wasn't even the best part. Theo puffed out his chest and explained that since the humans had been waiting for a while, he'd charged them an extra 0.02 tower coin for each tomato. He looked up at Sejun, practically vibrating with pride, and asked if he'd done well. He wanted to know if this finally earned him the title of Saleskit Theo. Sejun handed Theo a few coins as an incentive, telling him he'd worked hard. But the little cat wasn't satisfied. He complained that he'd done so well, so why was he still just employee Theo and not Saleskit Theo? Sejun just crossed his arms and told him he was still a long way off. Theo looked crushed, muttering about how hard it was to become a Saleskit. A black rabbit came over and patted him on the back, trying to cheer him up. But Sejun just smiled to himself. Turns out he already knew about Theo's little price hike. A message from the tower manager confirmed it, noting that the cat was making more money per sale. Sejun grinned, thinking the manager was pretty useful. He decided he'd send over another blue moon crop as a thank you for the information. A moment later, Sejun noticed something. Theo was sitting on the ground, happily eating some kind of snack from a red tube. The little guy was completely lost in it, licking away with a look of pure bliss on his face. Sejun pointed at the tube and asked Theo what on earth he was eating. The cat happily told him it was called churu. Sejun was shocked. He asked where Theo got it. The cat explained that a human gave it to him after he took a picture with her. He added that while this chicken flavor was good, salmon was definitely the best. Sejun was still trying to wrap his head around it. A human gave Theo that snack that meant items from the outside world could get into the tower. He started thinking about how that was even possible. He remembered there were 2 ways. The first was how he himself got here. Newcomers who vanish into the tower bring whatever they're holding with them. Usually those items are used for trading to help them survive and climb. The second way was through awakened hunters. They could bring things in, but there was a strict weight limit, only about 1 kilogram. The crazy part was they could take anything they wanted back out with them, no limits at all. The things hunters brought in were usually simple stuff they needed, like a hunter phone, which was basically a solar-powered smartphone for taking pictures and short-range calls. They also brought things like special instant food or cigarettes made just for the tower, all basic supplies for climbing. Sejun put it all together. A hunter used their precious weight limit to bring in a cat snack, not for survival, not for climbing, but just to meet Theo. He thought about that for a second and then it hit him. His eyes went wide as an idea started to form. A huge, greedy grin spread across his face. He rubbed his hands together, convinced he'd just come up with a genius new business plan. Theo, completely missing the point, just held up the snack. He innocently asked if Sejun wanted to eat it, having no idea what was really going through his head. But Sejun wasn't interested in the snack itself, he was thinking much bigger. The poor cat just sat there, looking completely heartbroken that his offer was ignored.